close your eyes and imagine the ancient world that came before us. Civilizations rose and fell, leaving behind puzzles that still baffle scientists today. These mysteries hold secrets we may never fully understand. Picture this. You're diving off the Greek coast in 1901 when suddenly your gear snags on something metallic. What you've just discovered will completely flip everything we thought we knew about ancient technology. The Antikythera mechanism. Sounds fancy, right? Well, it should. This bronze contraption is basically the world's first computer built around the 1st century BCE. And honestly, it makes my laptop look like a toy. When researchers first examined this thing, they thought it was just some corroded junk. Boy, were they wrong. Inside that green, crusty exterior was the most sophisticated piece of ancient technology ever found. We're talking about a device with over 30 bronze gears, all precisely cut and arranged to predict eclipses, track the Olympic Games, and follow every planet visible to the naked eye. The crazy part? This level of gear technology didn't show up again in Europe until clockmakers started tinkering around in the 14th century. That's more than 1,000 years of lost knowledge. Modern scientists have spent decades trying to recreate this thing using traditional tools. Most of them gave up. The precision required for those tiny gear teeth would challenge even today's manufacturers. What makes this even more mind-bending is wondering what other technological marvels the ancients created that we'll never find. But speaking of mysteries that baffle experts, wait until you hear about massive drawings that can only be properly seen from high above. Deep in Peru's Nazca Desert, someone drew pictures so massive you need an airplane to see them properly. These aren't your typical cave paintings either. We're talking about a hummingbird that stretches longer than 3 football fields, a spider the size of a city block, a monkey that would make King Kong look like a house pet. The ancient Nazca people created over 800 of these geoglyphs between 500 and 1500 years ago. But here's what makes archaeologists scratch their heads until they go bald. How do you draw a perfect hummingbird when you can't see what you're drawing? Try this at home. Draw a detailed map of your neighborhood while blindfolded. Good luck with that. The lines themselves are surprisingly simple to make. Just remove the dark surface rocks to reveal lighter soil underneath. What's not simple? Creating geometric patterns so precise they look like they were designed with modern surveying equipment. Some lines run perfectly straight for miles across hills and valleys. Local legends say these were messages to the mountain gods. Others think they're astronomical calendars marking celestial events. Then there's the crowd, who believes they're ancient landing strips for extraterrestrial visitors, because apparently aliens need runway lights too. But the real mystery isn't what they are. It's how a civilization without flight technology managed to create artwork that only makes sense from the sky. Makes you wonder what other impossible blueprints ancient builders were working from. Ancient Stonehenge sits on England's Salisbury Plain like a giant's abandoned puzzle. Those massive sarsen stones? Each one weighs about 25 tons. That's roughly equivalent to 4 elephants stacked on top of each other. The real head-scratcher isn't just their size, though. These colossal stones traveled 150 miles from their quarry, without trucks, cranes, or even the wheel as we know it. How exactly did our ancestors move something that heavy across such distances? Well, nobody really knows for sure. But wait, it gets weirder. Those smaller blue stones came from Wales, That's over 150 miles away, too. Recent studies suggest some of these stones might have been transported by glaciers during the Ice Age. Makes sense, right? Except the positioning is far too precise for random glacier dropping. The astronomical alignments are what really blow your mind. Every year, on the summer solstice, the sun rises perfectly aligned with the heel stone. This wasn't accidental. Ancient builders somehow calculated celestial movements with incredible accuracy. Recent ground-penetrating radar has revealed something extraordinary. There's an entire underground monument system surrounding Stonehenge. Stone circles, burial mounds, and wooden posts, creating a massive prehistoric landscape we're only beginning to understand. The missing blueprint remains archaeology's greatest puzzle. But speaking of undeciphered mysteries, there's a medieval manuscript that stumped every codebreaker for centuries. Deep in Yale University's rare book library sits one of history's most puzzling documents. The Voynich manuscript looks innocent enough at first glance. Just old parchment bound in worn leather. Then you open it. What you find inside defies explanation. Page after page of text written in a language that doesn't exist. At least no language anyone has ever seen. The alphabet looks vaguely familiar, almost European, but the words make absolutely no sense. Linguists have tried everything. Computer algorithms, frequency analysis, pattern recognition software. Nothing works. But the real mystery isn't just the text. It's the illustrations. Bizarre drawings of plants that don't grow anywhere on Earth. Women bathing in green pools, connected by intricate pipe systems. Strange zodiac-like symbols, mixed with unidentifiable astronomical charts. One section shows what appears to be pharmaceutical recipes, complete with detailed preparation instructions. If only we could read them. Carbon dating places the manuscript in the early 15th century. Whoever wrote it used expensive vellum and high-quality inks. This wasn't some medieval prank. Someone invested serious time and money into creating this thing. The strangest part? Every cryptographer who studies it swears the text follows genuine linguistic patterns. It has the statistical fingerprint of real language, just not one we recognize. Speaking of impossible construction projects, ancient Bolivia holds engineering secrets that make modern architects scratch their heads. Deep in Bolivia's mountains sits Pumapunku, a place that makes engineers scratch their heads and wonder if they missed something in school. These aren't your typical ancient ruins. We're talking about stone blocks cut with such precision that you can't slide a credit card between the joints. The craftsmanship here is ridiculous. Massive andesite stones, some weighing over 100 tons, fitted together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle designed by someone with serious OCD. No mortar anywhere. Just stone pressed against stone with tolerances that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. But here's where things get weird. The tool marks on these blocks suggest they were cut with diamond-tipped saws spinning at incredible speeds. Ancient Bolivians supposedly had copper chisels and stone hammers. That's like trying to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. The drilling holes are perfectly round, showing feed marks from high-speed rotary tools. Some blocks have complex internal angles and surfaces that curve in multiple directions simultaneously. Try explaining that to someone armed with primitive tools at 12,000 feet above sea level. Local legends claim the stones were softened like clay, then molded into shape. Sounds crazy until you realize that modern science still can't replicate these joints with our fancy equipment. Speaking of impossible construction, There's an island that simply vanished from existence, taking centuries of maps and Mexico's territorial claims with it. Ancient explorers spent centuries mapping Bermeja Island off Mexico's coast. Ships regularly stopped there for fresh water. Traders knew its exact location. Then something impossible happened. The entire island vanished. For 400 years, this rocky outcrop appeared on every Spanish colonial map. Pirates used it as a landmark. Fishermen knew its waters intimately. The Mexican government even included Bermeja in territorial calculations, extending their oil drilling rights deep into the Gulf of Mexico. Worth billions in petroleum reserves, actually. But when satellites started mapping everything in the 1980s, Bermeja simply wasn't there. Gone. Not eroded away or partially submerged. Completely absent. Like it never existed at all. Here's where things get suspicious. Some folks whisper about deliberate destruction. Maybe explosives sank the island to shift maritime boundaries. Sounds crazy, but billions in oil money makes people do strange things. Others blame rising sea levels, though the island supposedly sat 50 feet above high tide. The Mexican Navy searched for weeks. Nothing. Not even underwater ruins or debris fields. Just empty ocean where an island should be. Maps lied for centuries, or something erased a piece of land from existence. Speaking of mysterious disappearances, ancient monuments sometimes vanish in plain sight too. The Great Sphinx has been staring across the Giza Plateau for thousands of years. But here's what nobody talks about in history class. It might be way, way older than we've been told. Traditional archaeology dates the Sphinx to around 2500 BCE, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, not according to some geologists who've been poking around the monument with a very different perspective. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, examined the weathering patterns on the Sphinx and found something that made archaeologists extremely uncomfortable. The erosion patterns show clear signs of water damage, not wind and sand, but actual rainfall. Lots of it. The problem? Egypt's last period of heavy rainfall ended around 7,000 years ago. That would make the Sphinx at least 9,000 years old, possibly much older. We're talking about a time when Egypt was green and lush, not the desert we know today. But wait, it gets weirder. If the Sphinx really is that ancient, who built it? The dynastic Egyptians we learn about weren't even around yet. This means there was a sophisticated civilization capable of massive stone construction projects that we know absolutely nothing about. The implications are staggering. What happened to these mysterious builders? And what other secrets might be hiding beneath the sands, waiting to rewrite everything we thought we knew about human history? Speaking of rewriting history, the Romans had a building secret that puts our modern concrete to shame. The Romans built things that lasted 2,000 years. Their concrete gets stronger with time, while ours crumbles after decades. What did they know that we forgot? Modern concrete starts breaking down almost immediately. Water seeps in, steel reinforcement rusts, and structures need constant repair. But walk through Rome today, and you'll see ancient buildings that look ready for another millennium. The Pantheon's dome, still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome, built in 128 AD. The secret was volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius. Romans mixed it with lime and seawater, creating something that actually heals itself. When tiny cracks appear, the volcanic ash reacts with water and literally grows new crystals to fill the gaps. It's like having concrete that performs its own surgery. We only figured this out in 2013, 2,000 years later. Researchers finally understood why Roman harbors, constantly battered by waves, remained intact while modern seawalls crumble. The Romans weren't just lucky with their materials. They understood chemistry we're still catching up to. The recipe was lost during the Dark Ages, when the knowledge died with the empire. Now we're scrambling to recreate what ancient engineers took for granted. They built better, lasted longer, and used the earth itself as their laboratory. But Roman concrete isn't the only ancient map that reveals impossible geographical knowledge. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created something that should have been impossible. His world map showed the coastline of Antarctica with stunning accuracy. But here's the problem. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. Even weirder, the map shows Antarctica without ice, rivers flowing into the ocean, mountain ranges clearly visible. Scientists tell us Antarctica has been frozen for millions of years. Yet somehow, this medieval cartographer knew exactly what lay beneath all that ice. Piri Reis wasn't making wild guesses either. He wrote detailed notes about his sources, claiming he used 20 older maps, some dating back to Alexander the Great's time, others supposedly from the Library of Alexandria before it burned down. The longitude calculations on this map are spot on. That's mathematically impossible for the 1600s. Europeans didn't figure out accurate longitude until they invented precise clocks 2 centuries later. Yet there it is, perfectly plotted. Modern satellite surveys confirm the coastline matches reality almost perfectly. The subglacial topography, the river systems, even the mountains, all accurate to within miles. Who were Piri Reis's mysterious sources? What ancient civilization mapped Antarctica when it was ice-free? And how did they achieve such precision without modern technology? The Baalbek Temple complex in Lebanon holds stones that make these mapping mysteries look simple. Deep in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon stands Baalbek, home to the most impossible construction project in human history. The Roman Temple of Jupiter sits on a foundation that defies every rule of ancient engineering. 3 limestone blocks form part of this foundation. Each weighs around 800 tons. That's the equivalent of about 400 cars stacked on top of each other. But here's what makes engineers scratch their heads. These aren't just big rocks. They're precisely cut, perfectly fitted megalithic stones that somehow found their way into position. No crane in the ancient world could lift 800 tons. Heck, most modern cranes would struggle with that weight. The Romans had impressive engineering skills, sure, but moving mountains wasn't one of them. Yet there these blocks sit, mocking our understanding of ancient capabilities. Then there's the stone of the pregnant woman. This unfinished monolith weighs 1,200 tons and lies in a nearby quarry. Apparently, ancient builders thought 800 tons wasn't challenging enough. The cutting marks are still visible, showing someone actually planned to move this beast. Local legends claim giants built Baalbek before the flood. While giants seem far-fetched, the alternative explanations aren't much more believable. How do you move 1,200 tons without modern machinery? But Baalbek's mystery deepens when you consider what ancient texts reveal about impossible lifespans. The Sumerian king list reads like someone made a typo with a calculator. Ancient rulers supposedly lived for tens of thousands of years before a great flood changed everything. Well, almost everything. King Alulim ruled for 28,800 years. That's longer than recorded human history. His successor managed 36,000 years on the throne. Makes our modern politicians look like they're barely warming the seat, doesn't it? Then something fascinating happens. After the flood swept over, lifespans suddenly drop to normal human ranges. Kings start living reasonable lifespans of 20 to 90 years. It's like someone flipped a biological switch overnight. But here's where mathematicians started paying attention. Those seemingly random, enormous numbers aren't random at all. They follow specific mathematical patterns related to astronomical cycles and sacred geometry. The numbers encode information about planetary movements and calendar systems. Other ancient cultures tell remarkably similar stories. The Egyptians, Babylonians, and even distant cultures describe pre-flood rulers with impossible lifespans, followed by dramatic reductions after catastrophic flooding. Coincidence? Modern researchers wonder if these numbers represent something else entirely. Maybe dynasties, rather than individuals. Perhaps astronomical cycles. Or could they be recording actual genetic lifespans of a different human subspecies? Speaking of impossible ancient achievements, let's travel to a remote Pacific island where nearly 900 massive stone heads somehow walked into position. The massive stone heads scattered across Easter Island have always puzzled visitors. 887 of them dot the landscape. Each one weighs between 10 and 80 tons. But here's what blew my mind when I first learned this. The Polynesian islanders had a legend that these statues didn't need to be carried at all. They walked. Sounds crazy, right? Well, researchers decided to test this wild idea. They built a replica moai and discovered something incredible. By rocking it back and forth with ropes, the statue could actually walk upright across the ground. The movement looked eerily lifelike, just like the legends described. But that raises an even bigger question. How did a small population carve nearly 900 massive statues using only stone tools? The island's total population peaked at maybe 4,000 people. That's one statue for every 4 or 5 islanders. The logistics alone seem impossible. Then there's the mysterious collapse. The civilization that created these masterpieces suddenly vanished. When Europeans arrived, they found a barren island with a struggling population that had lost most knowledge of their ancestors' achievements. What happened to the master builders of Rapa Nui? While we ponder that mystery, ancient Egypt holds its own secrets about impossible lighting systems that might have illuminated underground chambers. Deep in the Temple of Dendera, Egyptian hieroglyphs tell a story that makes electrical engineers do a double take. The carved reliefs show what looks suspiciously like giant light bulbs, complete with filaments. These aren't your average temple decorations. The carvings depict large, elongated objects that bear an uncanny resemblance to modern electrical devices. Inside these bulament-like shapes, serpentine forms twist and coil, looking remarkably like the glowing filaments inside incandescent bulbs. Supporting figures appear to be holding what could only be described as insulators. The positioning is precise. The proportions are technical. The details are, well, electric. Mainstream archaeologists insist these images represent lotus flowers emerging from primordial waters, part of Egyptian creation mythology. Fair enough. But then why do the supporting figures look like they're handling high-voltage equipment? Why the careful positioning that screams electrical safety protocol? Some researchers suggest ancient Egyptians discovered electricity independently. They point to the nearby Baghdad battery as evidence of ancient electrical knowledge. Others wonder if these carvings document technology that predates our understanding of when electricity was invented. The serpentine shapes inside the bulb-like objects follow patterns that mirror electrical discharge through gas-filled tubes. Coincidence? What makes this even stranger is how precisely these carvings match technical diagrams of early electrical experiments, almost like someone was documenting actual technology rather than mythological concepts. But the real puzzle isn't what these carvings show. It's what happened to make such advanced knowledge disappear completely from Egyptian records. Deep in southeastern Turkey sits a site that completely shattered everything archaeologists thought they knew about early human civilization. Göbekli Tepe is 11,000 years old. That's 6,000 years older than Stonehenge and predates the pyramids by 7 millennia. But here's what makes your brain hurt. This massive temple complex was built by hunter-gatherers who were supposedly still figuring out how to grow wheat. We're talking about people who hadn't invented the wheel yet, somehow organizing massive construction projects that would challenge modern engineers. The site features enormous T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons each. These aren't rough stones either. They're precisely carved with intricate reliefs of animals, abstract symbols, and human figures. The craftsmanship rivals anything from later civilizations that had thousands of years more experience. Then there's the mystery of deliberate burial. Around 8000 BCE, the builders carefully covered the entire complex with tons of earth. Why would you spend generations creating something magnificent, then bury it? It's like building a cathedral and immediately filling it with dirt. Recent ground-penetrating radar reveals the excavated area represents less than 5% of the total site. What lies beneath could rewrite human history entirely. Speaking of mysterious construction projects that defy explanation, one man in Florida somehow moved over 1,000 tons of coral blocks using methods that baffled engineers for decades. Picture this. One man, Edward Leeds-Kallman, moves over 1,100 tons of coral blocks to build an entire castle, alone, at night, with no heavy machinery. The coral castle in Florida sounds like a tourist trap, but the physics behind it will keep you awake longer than you planned. Ed claimed he'd discovered the secrets of the pyramids. Anti-gravity, he called it. Sounds crazy, right? Well, here's what actually happened. This 5-foot-tall Latvian immigrant carved and moved massive coral stones, weighing up to 30 tons each. For comparison, that's heavier than 4 full school buses stacked together. Ed worked only at night, never allowing anyone to watch his methods. The tools found at the site? A few pulleys, some chains, and basic hand tools. Nothing remotely capable of lifting 30-ton blocks. Engineers today scratch their heads, trying to figure out how modern cranes would even position these stones with such precision. But Ed left clues. He talked about magnetic current and built strange devices with magnets and coils. His bedroom had a contraption that looked like something from a mad scientist's lab. Local kids claimed they saw him floating the stones by singing to them. The man died taking his secrets with him. Yet somehow, ancient civilizations across the globe managed similar impossible feats with even less technology. The Incas built Sacsayhuaman Fortress near Cuzco, using stones that weigh up to 90 tons each. But here's what makes engineers scratch their heads. These massive blocks fit together so perfectly that you can't slide a piece of paper between them. No mortar, no cement, just stone on stone. When earthquakes hit Peru, modern concrete buildings crumble like crackers. But Sacsayhuaman, it just sits there, unmoved. The Spanish conquistadors thought they were looking at the work of demons because human hands couldn't possibly achieve such precision. Each stone has multiple faces. Some have 12 different angles cut into them. Try explaining that to your geometry teacher. The Incas somehow carved these irregular puzzle pieces to lock together like a three-dimensional jigsaw that would make IKEA engineers weep. The really mind-bending part? We still can't figure out how they did it. Modern stone-cutting equipment leaves telltale marks. Sacsayhuaman stones show none. It's like they were shaped by invisible tools. Local legends say the stones were softened using plant extracts, molded like clay, then hardened again. Sounds crazy, right? Well, so does moving 90-ton blocks without wheels or large animals. Yet somehow, 500 years later, their earthquake-proof construction puts our modern buildings to shame. Speaking of impossible ancient accomplishments, another civilization developed sophisticated cities with mysterious writing we still can't decode. The Indus Valley civilization had something most ancient cultures never achieved, a writing system that nobody can crack. We're talking about one of humanity's earliest urban societies, flourishing around 4,000 years ago, across what's now Pakistan and northwest India. These people built cities that would make modern urban planners weep with envy. Harappa and Mohenjo-daro weren't just settlements. They were masterpieces of engineering. Every street laid out in perfect grids, sophisticated drainage systems that actually worked better than some modern cities, houses with private wells and bathrooms. The Romans get all the credit for plumbing, but the Harappans were flushing toilets while Europe was still figuring out basic agriculture. But here's what drives archaeologists absolutely crazy: their script. Over 4,000 symbols discovered on seals, pottery, and tablets. Short sequences that seem to follow grammatical rules. Yet after decades of attempts, nobody's managed to translate a single word. The sequences are too brief for computers to crack patterns, too alien for linguistic comparisons. Then around 1900 BCE, this entire civilization just vanished. No dramatic destruction, no obvious catastrophe. Cities abandoned gradually, leaving behind only their mysterious symbols mocking every codebreaker who tries. Speaking of mysterious disappearances, ancient Sanskrit texts describe something far more explosive than gradual abandonment. The ancient Sanskrit epic Mahabharata contains some seriously disturbing descriptions that sound way too much like nuclear warfare for comfort. Written thousands of years ago, it describes weapons called Brahmastra that could destroy entire armies in seconds. Check this out. The text talks about a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. It mentions bright flashes, mushroom clouds, and people's hair and nails falling out. Sound familiar? That's basically a perfect description of nuclear bomb effects, written when the most advanced weapon should have been a sharp stick. But wait, there's more weird stuff. The epic describes warriors using flying vehicles in aerial combat. These weren't just magical carpets either. The descriptions include technical details about propulsion systems and navigation equipment. Why would ancient poets make up such specific technical jargon? Then we get to the archaeological evidence, and things get really uncomfortable. Several sites across India show signs of intense heat exposure. We're talking temperatures that could melt stone into glass. The city of Mohenjo-daro has skeletons scattered in the streets, some still holding hands. Radiation levels at certain ruins remain elevated even today. Ancient astronaut theorists love this stuff, obviously. But even skeptical researchers struggle to explain the technical accuracy of these descriptions. Speaking of mysterious ancient objects, wait until you hear about the crystal skulls that seem impossible to create. The crystal skulls, supposedly carved by ancient Mesoamerican civilizations, have stumped researchers for decades. These life-size human skulls, carved from single pieces of quartz crystal, display craftsmanship that shouldn't exist. Well, here's what makes them impossible. Under microscopic examination, there are no tool marks whatsoever. None. When you carve quartz with any known ancient tool, you leave microscopic scratches, always. But these skulls? Completely smooth surfaces that look like they were formed rather than carved. The most famous skull, housed at the British Museum for years, has optical properties that defy explanation. Light enters through the eye sockets and illuminates the entire interior. The jaw piece, carved separately, fits so perfectly that no light escapes between the joints. Ancient toolmakers couldn't achieve this precision with copper chisels and sand. Then there's the Mitchell Hedges skull. This one supposedly took 300 years to complete, according to its discoverers. But modern analysis reveals something stranger. The crystal structure shows no signs of aging or weathering that centuries of work would create. Some researchers claim these skulls were carved using techniques we haven't rediscovered. Others insist they're elaborate hoaxes made with modern diamond-tipped tools. But even that theory has problems. The authentication debates continue, but the technical questions remain unanswered. Speaking of ancient mysteries that challenge our understanding of prehistoric capabilities, deep in the jungles of Cambodia sits Angkor Wat, a temple complex that makes modern architects scratch their heads. The entire structure mirrors the constellation Draco with pinpoint accuracy, not approximately, perfectly. The Khmer builders somehow encoded astronomical cycles into every measurement. The central tower represents Mount Meru, the cosmic axis. The surrounding moats, they mirror the Milky Way's spiral arms. But here's what gets really wild. The temple's layout matches the precession of the equinoxes over 26,000 years. How did 12th century builders calculate celestial movements spanning millennia? The engineering is equally baffling. They created a hydraulic system that managed water across 400 square miles. Underground channels, reservoirs, and canals that still function today. During monsoons, the system captured every drop. In dry seasons, it distributed water with surgical precision. Then there's the acoustic mystery. Clap your hands in specific chambers, and the echo patterns change based on your location. Some rooms amplify whispers across vast distances. Others create perfect silent zones. The most puzzling part? The sudden abandonment. Around 1400, this massive metropolis, housing over 1 million people, was simply left. No signs of war, disease, or natural disaster. Just empty. Ancient texts hint at knowledge from sky teachers. Teachers who apparently understood cosmic blueprints better than we do today. Speaking of mysterious knowledge, certain African tribes possessed astronomical information that should have been impossible to obtain. Deep in the mountains of Mali, the Dogon tribe has been telling the same story for over 700 years. They speak of visitors from Sirius who taught them secrets about the stars. Sounds like typical folklore, right? Well, here's where things get absolutely mind-bending. The Dogon knew that Sirius had a companion star. They called it Po-Tolo and described it as incredibly heavy, white, and invisible to the naked eye. They even drew diagrams showing its 50-year orbit around Sirius. Pretty impressive for people without telescopes, wouldn't you agree? But wait, there's more. They also knew this companion star was made of matter so dense that all the people on Earth couldn't lift a tiny piece of it. The crazy part? Sirius B wasn't officially discovered by astronomers until 1842. And its incredibly dense white dwarf nature wasn't confirmed until the 1920s. French anthropologists first documented these Dogon beliefs in the 1930s, decades before modern science caught up. The tribe insisted their ancestors learned this from amphibious beings called the Nomo, who came from the Sirius system in flying vessels. Maybe they had incredibly advanced ancient astronomers. Or perhaps their oral traditions preserved something far more extraordinary. Speaking of extraordinary knowledge, wait until you hear about an Irish tomb that captures sunlight with impossible precision. Picture a massive stone monument sitting in the Irish countryside, older than Stonehenge, older than the Egyptian pyramids, 5,200 years old to be exact. The Newgrange Passage tomb makes other ancient wonders look like recent construction projects. But here's what makes your brain hurt. Every December 21st, at exactly 8:58 in the morning, sunlight shoots through a tiny opening above the entrance. It travels down a 62-foot passage, perfectly illuminating the inner chamber for exactly 17 minutes. Then, darkness returns for another year. This isn't luck. This is engineering. Think about what this means. Stone Age, people somehow calculated the exact angle needed for this solar show. They positioned massive stones with mathematical precision that would challenge modern architects. We're talking about folks who supposedly lived in huts and hunted with spears. The passage itself is a masterpiece, 19 meters long, angled at precisely 24 degrees. The roof box above the entrance, custom designed to catch that winter solstice sunrise. Miss the angle by even half a degree, and the whole thing fails. What knowledge did these ancient Irish possess? How did they master astronomy without telescopes or computers? The builders left no blueprints, no instruction manuals. Speaking of mysterious underwater structures, there's something equally mind-bending lurking beneath Japanese waters that challenges everything we know about human history. The Yonaguni Monument sits on the ocean floor off Japan's coast like a sleeping giant. This massive underwater structure stretches over 150 meters long and towers 25 meters high. When marine biologist Kihachiro Aratake first spotted it in 1986, he thought he'd found nature's most impressive rock formation. But the more experts studied it, the weirder things got. The monument features perfectly straight edges, precise 90-degree angles, and what appears to be a massive staircase carved into solid rock. Natural erosion doesn't typically create such geometric precision. The structure includes terraces, platforms, and even what looks like a ceremonial altar at its summit. Robert Schoch, the same geologist who questioned the Sphinx's age, examined the site extensively. While he leans toward natural formation, he admits some features seem suspiciously artificial. The steps are too regular, the angles too perfect. Then there's the timing issue that keeps everyone up at night. If humans did build this monument, they constructed it when sea levels were much lower. We're talking about 12,000 years ago, minimum. That's before agriculture, before written language, before we supposedly knew how to organize massive construction projects. Local Okinawan legends speak of an ancient civilization called Mu that vanished beneath the waves. Coincidence? Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe something equally impossible. Flying machines with technical specifications that sound disturbingly familiar to modern engineers. Ancient Mesopotamian tablets tell wild stories about flying machines that would make NASA engineers jealous. These aren't your typical mythological tales either. The level of technical detail is frankly ridiculous for supposedly primitive people. The Sumerians wrote about skyships with such precision that modern aviation experts do double takes. They described propulsion systems, navigation techniques, and aerial combat maneuvers. One text even mentions something called a mu, a flying machine powered by what sounds suspiciously like jet engines. But here's where things get really weird. Archaeological digs have uncovered small artifacts that look exactly like modern airplanes, complete with wings, cockpits, and tail fins. Carbon dating puts them at over 4,000 years old. The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions his friend Enkidu traveling in a boat that flies through the sky. Another tablet describes vehicles that rise up and glide like eagles. The technical specifications include details about fuel consumption, altitude capabilities, and even landing procedures. Most fascinating are the battle descriptions. Ancient texts describe aerial warfare with formations, attack patterns, and defensive strategies. They knew about air superiority, bombing runs, and reconnaissance flights. The Mahabharata mentions Vimanas engaging in dogfights thousands of feet above the ground. Modern reconstructions based on these ancient blueprints have actually achieved limited flight success. Makes you wonder what other technologies we're still rediscovering. Speaking of mysterious ancient knowledge, let's examine some peculiar jars that might have powered these incredible machines. Picture this. Archaeologists digging through ancient Mesopotamian ruins stumble across what looks like a simple clay pot. Nothing special, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. These jars from around 2,000 years ago can actually produce electricity. We're talking real, measurable electrical current flowing from clay containers that predate our understanding of electricity by centuries. The setup is surprisingly elegant. A copper cylinder sits inside each jar, with an iron rod suspended down the middle. Fill it with an acidic liquid like vinegar or wine, and boom, you've got yourself a battery. The chemical reaction between the metals generates about 1.5 volts. But here's where your brain starts melting. What did ancient people need electricity for? Some researchers think they used these batteries for electroplating, coating cheap metals with thin layers of gold or silver. Archaeological evidence shows incredibly thin, even metal coatings on ancient artifacts that would be nearly impossible without electrical current. Others suggest medical uses. Ancient texts mention using divine sparks for pain relief. Maybe they figured out electrical stimulation therapy before we invented aspirin. The real mystery isn't how they worked. We can replicate them easily. It's why this knowledge vanished completely from human memory for over a millennium. Speaking of vanished knowledge, there's one ancient mystery that makes the Baghdad battery look simple. Plato had one hell of an imagination. Around 360 BCE, he wrote about an advanced island nation called Atlantis that supposedly vanished into the ocean 9,000 years before his time. Most scholars figured he was just making up a story to teach philosophy lessons. But here's what makes people scratch their heads. Plato wasn't known for writing fiction. The guy was obsessed with truth and reality. Why would he suddenly invent elaborate fantasy tales? He described Atlantis with the precision of an engineer documenting blueprints, concentric circles of land and water, advanced metallurgy using something called orichalcum, ships that could travel underwater. The details are suspiciously specific for a made-up story. Plato claimed his information came from Egyptian priests who had preserved records going back thousands of years. These weren't random myths passed down through campfire stories. These were supposedly written historical documents. Then there's the global flood evidence. Cultures worldwide have eerily similar stories about advanced civilizations destroyed by rising waters. The Sumerians had Utnapishtim. The Hebrews had Noah. Hindu texts describe entire continents swallowed by the sea. Maybe Plato was preserving a real memory wrapped in philosophical clothing. If so, where exactly did this technological paradise disappear to? The answer might be hiding in plain sight, carved into ancient stone discs found in a remote Chinese cave. In 1962, a Chinese archaeologist named Chipu Te made a discovery that would spark decades of controversy. Deep in the Bayan Karaula Mountains, his team uncovered a cave filled with peculiar stone discs. Not just a few, thousands of them. Each disc measured about 9 inches across, with a hole in the center, like ancient records waiting for a cosmic turntable. But here's where things get weird. They were covered in tiny hieroglyphic spirals that no one could read. For years, these drapa stones gathered dust in Chinese museums. Then in 1968, a Russian scientist claimed he'd cracked the code. According to his translation, the spirals told an incredible story. 12,000 years ago, beings called the Dropa crash-landed on Earth when their spacecraft malfunctioned. Stranded and unable to repair their ship, they tried to communicate with local tribes who initially attacked them, thinking they were demons. The text allegedly described how these visitors eventually integrated with local populations, creating a hybrid race. Archaeological surveys in the region did find graves containing unusually small skeletons with enlarged skulls. But were they proof or coincidence? Critics question everything about the Drapa story, from the translation to whether the discs even exist anymore. Meanwhile, reports suggest similar artifacts have surfaced across remote China, each potentially holding fragments of humanity's most extraordinary first contact story. High up in the Bolivian Andes sits Tiwanaku, an ancient city that shouldn't exist. We're talking 12,500 feet above sea level. That's thin air territory, where most people struggle to catch their breath walking upstairs. Yet somehow, an advanced civilization thrived here for over 1,000 years. Makes you wonder what they knew that we don't, right? The agricultural terraces alone are mind-boggling. These aren't your garden variety farming plots. They're sophisticated raised field systems that could feed hundreds of thousands of people at an altitude where modern crops barely survive. The engineering is so clever that NASA has studied their techniques for potential Mars colonization. But here's where things get really weird. The stone cutting at Tiwanaku rivals anything we can do today. Massive blocks fitted together with laser-like precision. No mortar needed. Some stones weigh over 400 tons, and show tool marks that suggest diamond-tipped cutting equipment. Their calendar calculations were more accurate than what Europeans were using 1,000 years later. They tracked Venus cycles to within minutes and predicted eclipses centuries in advance, all while living where the oxygen is so thin that most visitors need altitude sickness medication. The real mystery isn't just how they built Tiwanaku. It's how they disappeared so completely that even their neighbors forgot they existed. Speaking of mysterious disappearances, medieval Europe produced one artifact that continues to baffle every expert who encounters it. The Shroud of Turin has been driving people absolutely crazy for centuries. This 14-foot piece of linen cloth supposedly wrapped Jesus after his crucifixion, and it bears a faint image of a bearded, crucified man. But here's what makes scientists lose sleep at night. The image is a photographic negative. Nobody understood what they were looking at until 1898, when amateur photographer Secondo Pia took the first pictures of the shroud. When he developed the film, he nearly dropped his camera. The negative revealed a perfect positive image, as if the shroud itself was already a photograph. Problem is, photography wouldn't be invented for another 1,400 years after the shroud supposedly wrapped Christ. The image formation process baffles experts even today. It's incredibly superficial, affecting only the topmost fibers of the cloth. No paint, no dye, no artistic medium can be detected. The discoloration appears to be some kind of oxidation process, but what could create such precise detail without any applied substance? Carbon dating in 1988 placed the cloth between 1260 and 1390, suggesting medieval origin. Yet the image properties remain unexplained by medieval technology. Recent studies have questioned the carbon dating's accuracy, pointing to possible contamination from centuries of handling. Whether medieval mystery or ancient miracle, the shroud's image formation continues to defy scientific explanation. But ancient mysteries aren't limited to religious artifacts. Sometimes they're found in remarkable precision instruments. Earthquakes terrified ancient people. No warning, no escape, just the earth suddenly trying to shake you to death. But around 2,000 years ago, a Chinese inventor named Zhang Heng built something that sounds like pure fantasy, a machine that could detect earthquakes from hundreds of miles away. The device looked like something from a steampunk dream. 8 bronze dragons sat around a bronze urn, each holding a ball in its mouth. Below them, 8 bronze toads waited with mouths wide open. When an earthquake hit anywhere within a massive radius, one dragon would drop its ball into the toad below, pointing toward the disaster. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, here's where your jaw hits the floor. The thing actually worked. The first recorded test happened when a dragon dropped its ball, indicating an earthquake to the west. Nobody in the capital felt anything. People mocked Zhang Heng. Days later, a messenger arrived reporting a major earthquake exactly where the machine had pointed, hundreds of miles away. Modern seismologists still scratch their heads over this. The internal mechanism used pendulums and levers that somehow detected seismic waves before humans could feel them. We're talking about technology that anticipates modern earthquake detection by over a millennium. But the real mystery isn't how it worked. Scientists have built working replicas. The mystery is why this knowledge vanished completely, leaving humanity defenseless against earthquakes for another 1,000 years. Speaking of vanished knowledge, there's an ancient disk that makes Zhang Heng's invention look simple. The Minoan civilization left us quite the puzzle. A clay disc about 6 inches across, covered in 45 mysterious symbols arranged in a perfect spiral, found in the ruins of the palace at Phaistos in Crete. This little ceramic mystery has been driving scholars absolutely mad for over a century. What makes this disc so fascinating? Well, those symbols appear to be stamped, not carved. That's revolutionary. We're talking about what might be the world's first example of movable type printing, and this was made around 1700 BCE. Gutenberg was late to the party by about 3,000 years. The symbols themselves are bizarre. Little men running, fish swimming, bizarre helmets, plants that don't match anything we know. They're arranged in groups, separated by neat little lines, spiraling from the outside edge toward the center. Reading it feels like following an ancient treasure map. But here's where things get really weird. Nobody can read it. Not one word. Cryptographers who cracked World War II codes throw up their hands at this thing. Some think it's a prayer. Others believe it's an ancient board game. A few wild theories suggest it's an astronomical calendar, or even a song with musical notation. The strangest part? Nothing else like it has ever been found. It's completely unique, which makes cracking the code nearly impossible. Speaking of impossible construction techniques, Malta's ancient temples reveal even more mind-bending engineering secrets. Deep in the Mediterranean, Malta's ancient temples hold secrets that make moderns, architects, scratch their heads. These massive stone structures were built over 5,000 years ago, making them older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. But here's what really gets weird. The hypogeum of Halsaflieni goes 3 levels underground, carved entirely from solid rock. When you stand in the oracle chamber and speak, your voice gets amplified in ways that shouldn't be possible. The acoustics are so perfect that a whisper in one corner can be heard clearly across the entire chamber. Meanwhile, voices from other parts of the temple completely disappear. Tests show the chamber resonates at exactly 110 hertz. That's the same frequency that puts human brains into a meditative state and enhances psychic experiences. Coincidence? Probably not. Then there's the construction itself. Some foundation stones weigh over 20 tons. The builders somehow moved these massive blocks up steep hills without wheels, pulleys, or metal tools. They had stone hammers and rope. That's it. The temple walls contain perfectly fitted megalithic blocks with joints so tight you can't slide a knife between them. No mortar was used, yet these structures have survived earthquakes for thousands of years. But the real mystery isn't just how they built these acoustic marvels. It's why every ancient culture seemed obsessed with manipulating sound itself. When you find one impossible device in an ancient shipwreck, that's extraordinary. But when you find multiple advanced technologies in the same wreck, that's when things get really strange. The Antikythera wreck wasn't just carrying that famous bronze computer. Divers have pulled up bronze statues so perfectly crafted they make modern sculptors weep with envy. We're talking about anatomical precision that requires understanding of human musculature that shouldn't have existed back then. Then there are the other mechanical fragments, pieces of devices we still can't identify, gears within gears, bronze components that clearly belong to sophisticated machines. It's like finding a smartphone factory in George Washington's basement. But here's what really messes with your head. This wasn't some secret government vessel. It was a regular Roman trading ship, probably heading to Rome with luxury goods. which means this level of technology was common enough to be shipped around the Mediterranean, like pottery or wine. Makes you wonder what other Roman ships are sitting on the ocean floor, packed with technology that would rewrite our understanding of the ancient world. The Romans weren't supposed to have factories churning out precision instruments. Yet here we are, staring at the evidence. Speaking of precision that shouldn't exist, ancient astronomers were tracking celestial movements with accuracy that puts our modern calculations to shame. The ancient Maya didn't just track time, they absolutely mastered it. Their calendar system makes our modern Gregorian calendar look like a rough sketch drawn by a kindergartner. Picture this. While medieval Europeans were still arguing about whether the Earth was flat, Maya astronomers had already calculated the length of a solar year to 365.2420 days. That's only 17 seconds off from our current measurements using atomic clocks and satellites. 17 seconds after tracking the sun for over 1,000 years. But wait, it gets more ridiculous. The Maya tracked Venus with such precision that their calculations were accurate to within 2 hours over a period of 500 years. They predicted eclipses centuries into the future. Their lunar calendar was more accurate than anything Europe produced until the 1600s. Then there's their concept of zero. The Maya were using zero in mathematical calculations, while Europeans were still counting on their fingers. They understood place notation and could calculate dates millions of years into the past and future. How did a civilization without metal tools, wheels, or written numbers achieve such astronomical precision? They built observatories, sure, but the mathematical sophistication required goes beyond simple stargazing. Speaking of impossible achievements, wait until you hear about some recently discovered mummies that are challenging everything we know about human anatomy. Deep in Peru's Nazca Desert, researchers made a discovery that sounds straight out of science fiction. 3-fingered humanoid mummies with elongated skulls and bizarre bone structures that defy easy explanation. Carbon dating puts these remains at over 1,000 years old. That's not the weird part, though. These aren't your typical ancient Peruvian mummies. We're talking about beings with only 3 fingers on each hand, ribs that connect differently than human anatomy, and skulls stretched to impossible proportions. The bone density is unlike anything seen in normal human remains. Local tomb raiders first brought these mummies to light near the famous Nazca lines. Coincidence? Maybe not. The scientific community remains split down the middle. Some researchers claim elaborate hoax, pointing to possible plaster reconstruction. Others argue the carbon dating and bone analysis suggest genuine ancient origins that challenge our understanding of human variation. But here's what makes it really intriguing. The craftsmanship involved in creating such detailed fakes would rival the mystery of the originals themselves. Who has the skill and resources to fool modern dating techniques? X-ray analysis reveals internal organ structures that follow their own biological logic. The 3-fingered hands show wear patterns consistent with actual use over a lifetime. The bigger question isn't just what these mummies are, but what other impossible artifacts might be hiding in plain sight across ancient civilizations worldwide. Scattered across the Roman Empire, archaeologists keep finding these bizarre bronze objects that make absolutely no sense. They're called Roman dodecahedrons, and nobody has a clue what they were actually for. These things are geometric masterpieces, 12 pentagonal faces, each one perfectly crafted. Circular holes of different sizes punch through every face. Some have little knobs sticking out from the corners. They range from tiny palm-sized versions to ones big enough to use as paperweights. Well, assuming Romans needed paperweights for their scrolls. The really weird part? Not a single Roman writer mentions them, ever. You'd think someone would have written, "Hey Marcus, pass me that dodecahedron thing," in a letter or diary. But nope. Complete radio silence from one of history's most documented civilizations. Modern theories get pretty wild. Some think they're surveying instruments for measuring distances. Others suggest they're weapons. Imagine getting bonked by a bronze geometric nightmare. Religious artifacts? Maybe. Candle holders? Possibly, though that seems like overkill for mood lighting. The construction itself is mind-boggling. Each one required serious mathematical knowledge and metalworking skills. These weren't mass-produced trinkets. Someone spent considerable time crafting each mysterious object. But here's what really keeps researchers awake at night. If Romans made hundreds of these things, why did they suddenly stop? What happened to that knowledge? Speaking of vanishing knowledge, beneath the pyramids lies another Roman-era mystery that's even more puzzling. Deep beneath the Giza Plateau lies something that makes the Great Pyramid look simple: the Osiris Shaft, a 3-level underground complex that shouldn't exist. Discovered by accident, this flooded maze sits 60 feet below ground. But here's what's wild. It's not just some random hole. The engineering is ridiculous. 3 separate chambers connected by narrow shafts, all perfectly aligned. The bottom level stays permanently flooded, requiring industrial pumps just to peek inside. The ancient Egyptians supposedly built this with copper tools and ropes. Right. Try explaining how they carved granite sarcophagi underwater. Because that's what's down there. Massive stone boxes sitting in chambers that flood faster than you can drain them. Local legends call it the Tomb of Osiris. But no mummy was ever found. Instead, there's evidence of sophisticated water management. The flooding isn't accidental, it's controlled. Ancient drainage systems still function after thousands of years. The shaft's purpose remains completely unknown. Religious ritual site? Underground temple? Some kind of hydraulic machine? The precision stonework suggests whoever built this understood engineering principles we're only now rediscovering. Yet mainstream archaeology barely mentions it. Too inconvenient, perhaps? When your timeline of human development gets challenged by underground marvels, it's easier to look the other way. Speaking of civilizations that challenge everything we think we know, the Etruscans ruled central Italy before Rome became a powerhouse. Yet everything about them screams mystery. Their language? Completely unrelated to any known linguistic family. Their origins? Nobody knows where they came from. These weren't primitive people. They had advanced metallurgy, sophisticated urban planning, and drainage systems that would make modern engineers jealous. The Romans basically copied their entire governmental structure. But ask any scholar about Etruscan origins, and you'll get a shrug. Ancient historians couldn't agree either. Herodotus claimed they sailed from Asia Minor. Dionysius insisted they were native Italians. Modern DNA studies just add more confusion, showing genetic markers from both regions, plus some mystery population that doesn't match anyone. Their language is the real head-scratcher. We can read individual words, thanks to bilingual inscriptions, but understanding their grammar? Forget it. It's like trying to solve a crossword puzzle where half the clues are in Martian. Even funnier, they wrote from right to left, then switched directions on the next line like a typewriter. The weirdest part? They just vanished. Not through conquest or plague, but gradual assimilation into Roman culture. An entire civilization that willingly dissolved itself, taking their secrets with them. Speaking of vanishing civilizations, some left behind even stranger calling cards than mysterious languages. Deep in Peru's Ica region, thousands of carved stones tell impossible stories. These aren't your typical ancient artifacts. They show humans performing brain surgery, heart transplants, even riding dinosaurs. Dr. Javier Cabrera collected over 15,000 of these stones before his death. Each one challenges everything we think we know about ancient civilizations. The carvings depict advanced medical procedures that weren't developed until the 20th century. Some show telescopes pointed at stars. Others feature detailed maps of unknown continents. Well, here's where skeptics jump in. Many dismiss them as modern hoaxes, tourist trinkets carved by locals for gullible collectors. But radiocarbon dating on some stones reveals genuinely ancient surfaces. The patina, that weathered coating, takes centuries to develop naturally. The surgical scenes are particularly mind-bending. One stone shows a cesarean section with anatomical precision. Another depicts what looks like a kidney transplant, complete with detailed organ structures. How did ancient Peruvians know about internal anatomy without modern imaging? Then there's the dinosaur problem. Several stones show humans interacting with creatures that look suspiciously like extinct reptiles. T-Rex, Triceratops, Stegosaurus. Either these are elaborate fakes, or our timeline of human history needs serious revision. But the medical mysteries don't stop there. Ancient surgical techniques that modern doctors are still trying to understand reveal knowledge that seems impossible for its time. Deep in the Pacific Ocean sits Nan Madol, a city that shouldn't exist. Built on 92 artificial islands off the coast of Pohnpei in Micronesia, this place makes Venice look like amateur hour. The locals call it the Venice of the Pacific, but that's selling it short. We're talking about massive basalt columns, some weighing up to 50 tons, arranged into walls that rise from the water like ancient skyscrapers. And here's what makes your brain hurt. Nobody knows how they got there. The stones came from a quarry on the opposite side of the island. That's a 25-mile journey across rough terrain and open ocean. Try moving your couch across town, and you'll appreciate the magnitude of this problem. These ancient builders were somehow floating house-sized rocks across the Pacific without cranes, trucks, or even wheels. Local legends offer a wild explanation. They say two sorcerer brothers flew the stones through the air using magic. The rocks simply levitated into position, guided by mystical chants and supernatural powers. Sounds ridiculous, right? But when modern engineers calculated what it would take to build Nan Madol today, they scratched their heads. The logistics alone would bankrupt most small nations. Then there's the population problem. The island couldn't support enough people to undertake such a massive construction project. Yet somehow, between 800 and 1200 years ago, someone built this floating stone metropolis. Speaking of impossible biblical encounters, ancient texts describe even stranger technological marvels. Deep in the book of Ezekiel, there's something that reads less like ancient scripture and more like a UFO encounter report. The biblical prophet describes wheels within wheels, blazing metal, and creatures with 4 faces descending from the sky, in what sounds suspiciously like a spacecraft. What makes this fascinating? Ezekiel doesn't just say, "Flying thing appeared." He gives technical specifications. The craft had landing gear, multiple levels, glowing amber-colored metal that modern metallurgists can't quite identify, 4 creatures that moved in perfect coordination without turning, exactly how you'd expect advanced robotics to function. NASA engineer Joseph Blumrich got curious about this ancient text in 1973. He wanted to debunk the whole Ezekiel saw a spaceship theory once and for all. Instead, he ended up writing a book called The Spaceships of Ezekiel because the descriptions were so technically accurate. The wheels with eyes around the rim? Blumrich realized these could be helicopter-style rotors with portholes. The straight legs that didn't bend? Perfect landing struts. The crystalline dome overhead? A transparent cockpit. Every bizarre detail suddenly made engineering sense. Well, either Ezekiel had an incredibly vivid imagination for spacecraft design, or he witnessed something that wouldn't officially exist for another 2,500 years. Speaking of impossible technology appearing in ancient texts, Tibetan monks chanting in perfect harmony, their voices echoing off monastery walls. But according to several historical accounts, something extraordinary happened when they hit just the right frequency. Stones began to lift off the ground. Swedish Dr. Jarl witnessed this firsthand in 1939. He watched monks arrange themselves in a precise semicircle around a massive boulder. Drums beat at specific intervals. Horns blared in calculated sequences. The stone allegedly rose into the air and moved to its intended position on a cliff face. Sounds impossible, right? Well, modern science actually supports the basic principle. Acoustic levitation is real. NASA uses it in laboratories today to suspend tiny objects using sound waves. The trick is finding the exact frequency that creates standing wave patterns. Ancient texts from Tibet describe detailed acoustic engineering principles. They mention specific tonal combinations that could manipulate gravitational fields. Egyptian hieroglyphs show similar scenes of priests using sound to move massive temple blocks. The catch? Nobody can replicate the large-scale effects described in these historical accounts. We can levitate small objects in controlled environments, but lifting multi-ton stones remains beyond our current understanding. Maybe the monks possessed knowledge about resonance frequencies that we've lost. Or perhaps they understood how to amplify sound waves in ways we haven't rediscovered. But here's where things get even stranger. These acoustic techniques might explain how other ancient civilizations moved impossibly heavy stones. Deep in Sardinia's rugged landscape stand massive stone figures that shouldn't exist. These aren't your typical ancient statues. We're talking about enormous warriors carved from single blocks of stone, some reaching over 11 feet tall. The locals call them giants of Monte Prama. What makes these sculptures absolutely mind-bending? They were created around 3,000 years ago by a civilization we know almost nothing about. The Nuragic people left behind these towering sentinels without any written records explaining who they were or why they built them. But here's where things get really strange. Local Sardinian folklore has always insisted that actual giants once roamed their island. Not metaphorical giants, real flesh and blood, enormous humans who built the mysterious stone towers scattered across the countryside. Archaeological digs have uncovered skeletal remains that are, let's just say, unusually large. We're talking about human bones that suggest people standing 7 to 8 feet tall. Some reports claim even bigger discoveries, though these remain controversial. The craftsmanship on these stone giants is incredible. Detailed armor, intricate facial features, elaborate shields. The skill level rivals anything from classical Greece or Rome, yet these predate those civilizations by centuries. What's even more puzzling is how these massive statues were deliberately broken into pieces and buried. Someone wanted them hidden. The question is why? Speaking of mysterious northern civilizations, the ancient Greeks wrote about an even more incredible place. Deep in the frozen Arctic, the ancient Greeks believed something incredible existed. They called it Hyperborea, a land beyond the north wind, where an advanced civilization thrived in eternal spring. Herodotus wasn't making stuff up for fun. He documented detailed accounts from travelers who claimed they'd actually been there. These weren't wild tales around a campfire. The Greeks treated Hyperborea as a real place, complete with trade routes and diplomatic relations. The descriptions sound almost sci-fi. A tropical paradise hidden somewhere in the Arctic ice, populated by people who lived for 1,000 years. They supposedly had technology that made them immune to disease and aging. Well, that's convenient, right? But here's what gets really weird. Multiple ancient sources describe the same impossible features. Cities powered by mysterious energy sources. Transportation that defied gravity. Knowledge of astronomy that wouldn't be rediscovered for millennia. Modern researchers are starting to wonder if these stories preserve memories of something real. Before the last ice age, the Arctic might have been much warmer. Archaeological evidence suggests advanced settlements existed in now frozen regions. The Hyperboreans allegedly had mastery over time itself, manipulating seasons and weather patterns. They could extend daylight and create artificial warmth in the coldest climates. Speaking of manipulating the impossible, there's another legendary place that vanished beneath the waves, but this one might actually be sitting on the ocean floor. Deep beneath the waters, off India's western coast, lies something that shouldn't exist. Krishna's legendary golden city of Dwarka, described in ancient Sanskrit texts as a marvel of engineering and divine architecture, has been found exactly where the scriptures said it would be. Marine archaeologists discovered massive stone structures, walls, and what appear to be ancient docks submerged in the Gulf of Cambay. The underwater ruins stretch for miles, featuring precisely cut stones and complex urban planning that matches descriptions from the Mahabharata and other ancient texts. Carbon dating of artifacts recovered from the site suggests these structures are around 9,000 years old. But here's what makes archaeologists nervous. The Sanskrit descriptions of Dwarka weren't written as myths or legends. They read like technical manuals, complete with specific measurements, construction materials, and even urban planning details. The texts describe crystal-powered lighting systems, anti-gravity vehicles called vimanas, and defensive walls that could withstand divine weapons. What really gets interesting is that the underwater city's layout mirrors the textual descriptions with startling accuracy. Street patterns, building foundations, and even the harbor configuration align with ancient accounts that scholars once dismissed as pure fantasy. The discovery raises uncomfortable questions about how much our ancestors actually knew about advanced engineering. Because if Dwarka was real, what other mythical technologies might be hiding in plain sight in ancient texts? Deep beneath ancient temples, and pyramids, archaeologists have discovered something that challenges everything we know about prehistoric technology. Stone chambers carved with mathematical precision, designed to amplify and focus sound waves in ways that seem almost impossible. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza claps back at you, literally. Clap your hands at the base of the pyramid, and it responds with a sound identical to the sacred Quetzalbird's call. The Maya didn't just stumble onto this acoustic miracle. They engineered it with surgical precision. But here's where things get really weird. These chambers weren't just for show. Ancient texts describe priests using sound to move massive stone blocks during construction. Tibetan monks still practice similar techniques today, chanting at specific frequencies while moving heavy objects. Modern scientists have proven that sound waves can indeed levitate small objects through acoustic levitation. The right frequency creates pressure nodes that literally hold matter in midair. Ancient builders somehow figured this out thousands of years ago. The Great Pyramid's King's Chamber resonates at exactly 110 Hz, a frequency that affects human brain activity and can induce altered states of consciousness. Coincidence? Not likely. These acoustic properties required knowledge of physics that supposedly didn't exist back then. Yet the evidence sits there, carved in stone, humming with ancient secrets. Speaking of ancient secrets, there were groups that supposedly guarded this lost knowledge for centuries. Secret societies throughout history claimed to guard ancient wisdom that mainstream civilization had supposedly lost. The mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and Babylon operated behind closed doors for thousands of years. But what exactly were they hiding? These weren't just philosophical clubs discussing abstract ideas over wine. Members underwent intense initiation rituals involving precise acoustic chambers, geometric layouts, and what ancient texts describe as consciousness manipulation techniques. The Eleusinian mysteries in Greece lasted nearly 2,000 years, yet we still don't know what happened during their ceremonies. Well, here's where things get weird. Archaeological evidence suggests these schools possessed advanced knowledge about human consciousness, sacred geometry, and energy manipulation. The Great Pyramid's inner chambers match descriptions from mystery school texts about transformation chambers. Coincidence? Probably not. Egyptian mystery schools taught initiates about the science of the soul, using specific sound frequencies and architectural features. The Greeks had similar practices at Delphi, where underground chambers created altered states of consciousness through natural gases and acoustic resonance. But here's the really intriguing part. These mystery schools existed simultaneously across completely separate civilizations. Same techniques, same geometric principles, same understanding of consciousness manipulation. How did isolated cultures develop identical esoteric knowledge systems? The Templars allegedly discovered something profound beneath Solomon's temple that connected to these ancient traditions. What they found might explain why medieval banking suddenly appeared alongside their mysterious rituals. Speaking of mysterious discoveries, some researchers believe certain genetic anomalies found in ancient remains point to deliberate manipulation. In the Paracas Peninsula of Peru, archaeologists unearthed something that challenges everything we thought we knew about human evolution. These elongated skulls aren't just oddly shaped. They're breaking the rules of basic biology. The cranial capacity is 25% larger than modern humans. That's not a typo. We're talking about skulls that could house significantly bigger brains than ours. The volume measurements consistently exceed normal human parameters by margins that shouldn't exist. But wait, there's more weirdness brewing. DNA analysis revealed genetic markers that don't match any known human population. The mitochondrial DNA showed mutations so rare that scientists initially thought their equipment was malfunctioned. When they ran the tests again, same results. Traditional archaeology explains elongated skulls through head-binding practices. Wealthy families would wrap infants' heads to create distinctive shapes. Fair enough. But here's where that explanation falls apart completely. Head binding changes shape, not volume. You can't squeeze a skull into holding more brain matter. It's like trying to fit a gallon of water into a pint glass by changing the container's shape. Physics doesn't work that way. The bone density differs too. Thicker, heavier, with unusual suture patterns that don't follow normal human cranial development. Some specimens show only 2 parietal plates instead of the standard 3. Speaking of impossible anatomy, ancient underground tunnel systems reveal engineering marvels that shouldn't exist either. Medieval map makers somehow drew Antarctica's coastline centuries before anyone officially discovered the frozen continent. The Orontius Phineas map from 1536 shows Antarctica with startling accuracy. Not just a rough blob, but actual geographical features like mountain ranges and river systems. But here's where your brain starts hurting. The map shows Antarctica without ice, rivers flowing to the sea, mountain peaks clearly visible, the kind of detail you'd only get from extensive ground surveys of an ice-free landmass. Problem is, Antarctica has been frozen solid for millions of years. At least that's what we're told. Then there's the Mercator map from 1569. Same deal. Antarctic rivers, coastlines, inland features. Gerardus Mercator claimed he used ancient source maps for his impossible accuracy. Ancient source maps? From who exactly? The Piri race map we mentioned earlier isn't alone in this club of impossible cartography. Multiple medieval maps show similar impossible knowledge. The Haji Ahmed map from 1559, the Zeno map from 1424, all depicting Antarctic features that shouldn't exist on any map from that era. These cartographers openly admitted they were copying from much older sources. Sources that somehow had surveyed an ice-free Antarctica. The question that keeps researchers awake at night isn't just how these ancient maps existed, it's who made the original surveys. Speaking of impossible ancient knowledge, the Rongorongo script holds secrets that died with its last readers. Deep in the South Pacific sits Easter Island, home to those famous stone heads everyone recognizes. But there's another mystery hiding there that hardly anyone talks about. The Rongorongo script. 26 wooden tablets covered in tiny hieroglyphs that nobody can read. Not even the smartest code breakers have cracked this thing. What makes it extra weird? It's the only written language ever developed in Polynesia. Out of hundreds of Pacific Island cultures, only Easter Island decided to invent writing. The glyphs look like fish, birds, plants, and human figures dancing across the wood. Some tablets were used as fishing line spools by locals who had no idea what they meant. Others got burned as kindling. Talk about destroying ancient wisdom by accident. Here's what's really puzzling. The symbols don't represent sounds like our alphabet. They seem to represent entire concepts or ideas. Each glyph could mean a whole story or ritual instruction. The few remaining tablets might contain the island's entire history, religious beliefs, or even practical knowledge about survival. The last person who could read Rongorongo, died in the 1870s after Peruvian slave raids devastated the island. All that knowledge vanished with him. But Easter Island holds even more technological mysteries that go way beyond mysterious writing systems. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe flying machines called vimanas with the precision of modern engineering manuals. These aren't vague mentions of magical chariots. We're talking detailed technical specifications that would make a Boeing engineer sweat. The Vaimanika Shastra contains blueprints for aircraft with mercury vortex engines. Mercury? That's not exactly your typical flight fuel. But here's where things get wild. These texts describe propulsion systems that create rotating mercury plasma, generating anti-gravitational fields. Modern physics is just catching up to this concept. These weren't primitive sketches either. The manuals include navigation systems, aerial combat tactics, and even cloaking technology. One section explains how to make aircraft invisible using mirrors and electrical currents. Stealth technology, anyone. The Ramayana describes vimanas carrying troops across continents, engaging in aerial dogfights, and launching weapons that sound suspiciously like missiles. The detail is staggering. They mention different types of aircraft for various purposes, from personal transport to massive cargo vessels. What really raises eyebrows is the technical accuracy. These texts describe principles of aerodynamics, metallurgy for lightweight construction, and energy systems that sound remarkably similar to modern ion propulsion. Either ancient Indians had incredible imaginations, or they witnessed something extraordinary. The precision is unsettling. But if ancient civilizations mastered flight, what happened to this technology? And speaking of vanishing knowledge, there's another mystery lurking beneath European hills. Deep in Bosnia's rolling hills lies something that's got archaeologists either scratching their heads or rolling their eyes. Meet the alleged Bosnian pyramids, massive structures that some claim represent Europe's first pyramid complex. Semir Osmanagic discovered these formations near Visoko in 2005. He insists they're not natural hills, but ancient human-made pyramids, possibly 12,000 years old. That would make them older than Egypt's Great Pyramids by 7 millennia. Well, here's where things get weird. The supposed Pyramid of the Sun measures 220 meters high, with precise triangular faces. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what appears to be an internal structure, with chambers and corridors. But wait, there's more. Beneath these formations runs an extensive tunnel network called Ravne. Workers have cleared kilometers of passages lined with massive stone blocks. The tunnels contain unusual ceramic sculptures and emit a low-frequency hum that some claim has healing properties. Electromagnetic measurements show the pyramid emitting a focused energy beam from its apex. The beam allegedly grows stronger with altitude and doesn't weaken like typical electromagnetic radiation. Local plants reportedly grow larger near the structures. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss the entire project as pseudoscience, calling the formations natural flatiron-shaped hills. They argue the tunnels are medieval mine shafts, nothing more. Yet something even stranger lurks beneath Egypt's ancient monuments, waiting to challenge everything we think we know. Somewhere beneath the warm waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans lies one of history's most debated lost continents, Lemuria. This wasn't just some fantasy dreamed up by Victorian scientists looking for attention. The theory started with a real puzzle that had zoologists scratching their heads. Why did lemurs live in Madagascar and India, but nowhere in between? Philip Sclater proposed in 1864 that a massive land bridge once connected these regions. Makes sense, right? But then things got weird. Ancient Tamil texts from southern India describe Kumari Kandam, a vast continent that sank beneath the waves thousands of years ago. These weren't recent stories either. We're talking about oral traditions passed down for millennia, before anyone in Europe had even heard the word Lemuria. The Hawaiians have similar legends about Mu, their sunken motherland in the Pacific. Aboriginal Australians speak of disappeared islands where their ancestors lived. Even Easter Island's isolated position makes more sense if larger land masses once existed nearby. Geology throws us some interesting curveballs here. The Kerguelen Plateau, now mostly underwater, was once above sea level. Massive land subsidence has happened before. The question isn't whether land can sink, but whether an advanced civilization went down with it. Speaking of advanced civilizations and their mysterious disappearances, there's another artifact that suggests ancient peoples possessed knowledge that shouldn't have existed. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't just some fancy religious box. According to the Bible, this thing could literally kill people who touched it wrong. We're talking about instant death from what sounds suspiciously like electrical shock. The construction details are weirdly specific. Gold-plated acacia wood with golden cherubim on top, acting like conductors. 2 gold-covered poles for carrying it, because apparently nobody could touch the actual box without dropping dead. Sound familiar? It's basically a massive capacitor design. Then there's the whole glory of the Lord thing. Witnesses described bright lights, electrical discharges, and a humming sound. Moses had to wear a veil because his face literally glowed after being near it. Either this was the world's first tanning bed, or we're looking at radiation exposure. The Ark could supposedly level city walls, part rivers, and communicate divine messages. That's not religious mysticism. That's advanced technology. Some researchers think it was an electromagnetic device, possibly even radioactive. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BCE, the Ark vanished. No trace, no fragments, nothing. The Templars spent decades searching for it in the Holy Land's underground chambers. But what if they found something even stranger than ancient religious artifacts? The medieval period holds secrets that would make the Ark look primitive. Throughout history, ancient builders seemed to understand something about magnetism that we're only now rediscovering. They weren't just stacking stones randomly. The Temple of Jerusalem supposedly featured a massive lodestone in its foundation. This magnetic rock could reportedly levitate metal objects during certain ceremonies. Wild, right? But here's what's fascinating. Multiple historical sources describe the same phenomenon at different temples across the ancient world. Chinese texts from 2,000 years ago detail magnetic chambers where small objects would float in midair. The builders positioned lodestones with surgical precision to create these effects. Modern engineers trying to replicate this, they're scratching their heads. Then there's the mysterious case of ancient Egyptian obelisks. Many contain iron deposits arranged in specific patterns that create localized magnetic fields. Coincidence? Doubtful. These monuments were positioned at exact coordinates that amplify Earth's natural magnetism. The really weird part is how these ancient cultures knew about magnetic declination, the difference between magnetic north and true north. This knowledge was supposedly discovered in the Middle Ages. Yet Mayan temples are perfectly aligned, accounting for magnetic variation. Some researchers believe certain megalithic sites functioned as massive magnetic manipulation devices. Stonehenge, for instance, sits on iron-rich soil that creates measurable electromagnetic anomalies. But perhaps the strangest magnetic mystery involves reports of ancient practitioners actually bending magnetic fields to their will. Speaking of bending, beneath the Sphinx lies something that makes archaeologists break out in cold sweats. We're not talking about a few dusty artifacts here. Seismic surveys have detected massive voids under this ancient monument, hollow chambers, empty spaces where there should be solid rock. The readings show chambers running deep underground. Some researchers believe these could be part of the legendary Hall of Records. Ancient Egyptian texts mention hidden libraries containing the wisdom of pre-dynastic civilizations. Knowledge from before the pharaohs even existed. But here's where things get really strange. Access to these underground areas is heavily restricted. Even legitimate researchers face bureaucratic walls thicker than the Sphinx itself. Why the secrecy? What exactly are they protecting down there? Ground-penetrating radar has revealed passages extending far beneath the monument. These aren't natural caves. The geometry suggests artificial construction, precise angles, deliberate design. Someone built these chambers thousands of years ago. Edgar Cayce, the famous psychic, predicted the discovery of ancient records beneath the Sphinx. He claimed these chambers contained the complete history of Atlantis. Sounds crazy, right? Well, the seismic data keeps matching his descriptions. The Egyptian authorities maintain tight control over any excavation attempts. Makes you wonder what they're worried about finding. Or maybe what they've already found and aren't telling us. Speaking of ancient nuclear mysteries, some researchers believe our ancestors possessed knowledge that would shock modern scientists. Deep in the forests of Gabon, Africa, scientists stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist: natural uranium deposits that had been cooking themselves for 2 billion years. Yeah, you heard that right. Mother Nature apparently figured out nuclear fission long before humans even existed. These weren't just any uranium deposits. The isotope ratios were all wrong. Instead of the expected uranium-235 levels, these rocks showed clear signs of sustained nuclear chain reactions. We're talking about naturally occurring nuclear reactors that ran themselves for hundreds of thousands of years. But here's where things get really interesting. The waste products from these ancient reactors are identical to what we produce in modern nuclear power plants. The plutonium signatures, the fission byproducts. It's like finding a Ford factory from the Jurassic period. French scientists first discovered this mystery in 1972, when uranium samples didn't match expected compositions. At first, they thought someone had stolen weapons-grade uranium. Turns out, these rocks had been splitting atoms since before complex life existed on Earth. The really mind-bending part? Some researchers wonder if ancient civilizations might have discovered and utilized these natural reactors. After all, if you knew where to look, you'd have a ready-made nuclear power source just waiting underground. Speaking of ancient mysteries involving impossible measurements, there's another puzzle that spans continents and cultures. Across ancient Europe, from Scotland to Brittany, stone circles share something remarkable. They weren't just thrown together randomly. These monuments follow a precise measurement system that shouldn't exist. Meet the megalithic yard. Sounds boring, right? Well, this ancient unit of measurement is exactly 2 feet and 7.07 inches. And here's where your brain starts hurting. This exact same measurement appears in stone circles separated by hundreds of miles and built by completely different cultures. Professor Alexander Thom discovered this pattern in the 1960s while surveying stone monuments. The guy was obsessed with precision, measuring everything down to fractions of inches. What he found made no sense. Stone circles in the Orkney Islands matched measurements in Cornwall. Brittany's monuments use the same unit as sites in Wales. The accuracy is mind-blowing. We're talking about consistency within 0.2% across vast distances. That's like building the Golden Gate Bridge and having every rivet placed with millimeter precision. But here's the real puzzle. These ancient builders had no telescopes, no GPS, no communication networks. Yet somehow, they coordinated a building program spanning centuries and covering thousands of square miles. Makes you wonder what kind of organization was needed. Even weirder, some researchers think they found evidence of this same measurement unit carved into stone tablets from ancient Mesopotamia. Scattered across every continent on Earth, massive stone structures called dolmens stand like ancient riddles waiting to be solved. These aren't your typical ruins. We're talking about enormous capstone slabs weighing up to 50 tons, balanced perfectly on vertical stone pillars. What makes this truly mind-bending? These identical structures appear everywhere from Korea to Ireland, from India to New England. Same design, same construction technique, same mysterious purpose. The official story says different cultures independently invented the same building style. But here's where that falls apart. Many of these dolmens were built during times when these civilizations had zero contact with each other. No ships crossing oceans, no communication networks. Yet somehow, people separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years all decided to build the exact same thing. The precision is what really gets you thinking. These aren't rough stone piles thrown together by primitives. The joints are so tight, you can't slide a knife blade between them. The balance so perfect, they've survived earthquakes that topple modern buildings. Local legends worldwide describe these structures as portals, energy devices, or communication systems with the gods. Every culture has the same stories about them humming, glowing, or producing strange effects during certain celestial events. But perhaps the most intriguing mystery lies beneath our feet, in vast underground networks that seem to connect these surface monuments across impossible distances. The Knights Templar weren't just medieval warrior monks with a taste for crusading. They stumbled onto something much bigger during their 2 centuries in the Holy Land, something that made them incredibly powerful. And then they vanished almost overnight, taking their secrets with them. Founded in 1118 to protect Christian pilgrims, the Templars quickly became Europe's first international banking system. They developed credit systems that wouldn't be matched for centuries. But how did a handful of knights become financial masterminds seemingly overnight? Their base sat directly on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the same spot where Solomon's temple once stood. For 9 years, they barely recruited new members. Instead, they dug extensively. What were they looking for under those ancient foundations? Some researchers believe they discovered technological artifacts from Solomon's era. The biblical king was renowned for his wisdom and mysterious devices. The Ark of the Covenant, the Brazen Sea, objects described with surprisingly technical specifications. The Templars' sudden expertise in navigation, engineering, and finance suggests they found something extraordinary. Their Gothic cathedrals displayed mathematical precision that rivaled any civilization. Their ships used advanced compass techniques. They even possessed detailed maps of lands not yet officially discovered. But here's what really gets interesting. When King Philip IV moved against them in 1307, the Templars' vast treasure fleet disappeared without a trace, along with whatever ancient knowledge they'd uncovered. Which brings us to the precision tool marks found on ancient stones worldwide. When archaeologists examine ancient megalithic sites, they find something that shouldn't exist. Tool marks on granite and basalt that look like they came from industrial machinery. Take the granite boxes in Egypt's Serapeum. These 25-ton containers have perfectly flat surfaces and 90-degree angles. The precision? Within 0.02 of an inch. That's machinist-level accuracy. But here's what really baffles experts. The saw marks. Long, straight grooves that run through the hardest stone on Earth. Granite ranks 7 on the hardness scale, yet something sliced through it like butter. Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer, analyzed these marks for decades. His conclusion? The feed rate of whatever cut these stones was 100 times faster than modern diamond-tipped saws. 100 times faster. Then there are the core holes. Perfectly cylindrical bores drilled into solid granite with spiral grooves still visible. The drilling rate? 1 inch per revolution through granite that would destroy most modern drill bits. Egyptian authorities claim these were made with copper tools and sand. Really? Copper has a hardness of 3. Granite is 7. That's like trying to cut steel with a butter knife. The most unsettling part? These aren't isolated examples. Similar precision appears at megalithic sites worldwide, all supposedly built by civilizations without advanced technology. But if ancient builders didn't have these tools, someone certainly did. The ancient Sumerian tablets tell a story that makes modern scientists very uncomfortable. They describe beings called the Anunnaki, literally meaning those who from heaven came. And these weren't gods in flowing robes floating on clouds. These were detailed technical descriptions of visitors with advanced knowledge who supposedly altered early human development. The tablets describe genetic manipulation, mining operations, and technological transfers that sound disturbingly like science fiction. What's really unsettling? The Sumerians had no concept of fiction writing as we know it. They recorded administrative data, king lists, and historical events. Why would they suddenly switch to fantasy novels? The tablets describe how these visitors taught humans agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, and metallurgy. Before Sumerian civilization, humans were hunter-gatherers. Then suddenly, boom. Complex cities, writing systems, bronze working, and astronomical knowledge that rivals our own. Zechariah Sitchin's translations suggest the Anunnaki needed gold for their atmosphere and created a worker species by combining their genetics with early hominids. Mainstream academics hate this interpretation, but they can't explain the sudden leap in human capability either. The really weird part? Similar stories appear worldwide. Ancient cultures from every continent describe sky beings who brought knowledge and altered humanity. That's quite a coincidence for isolated civilizations. Speaking of impossible coincidences, underground cities across the globe share remarkably similar designs despite zero contact between their builders. Deep beneath our feet lies a world that shouldn't exist. Derinkuyu, carved into Turkish rock, housed 20,000 people across 18 floors underground. 20,000. That's a small city, except it's buried 300 feet down. The ventilation alone makes modern engineers scratch their heads. Fresh air flowed perfectly through 52 shafts, reaching every corner without fans or pumps. Meanwhile, my basement gets stuffy if I forget to crack a window. But Turkey isn't special here. Montreal has an entire underground city that most tourists never see. Beijing's tunnels could shelter millions. Cappadocia has over 200 subterranean settlements. Someone was really committed to the whole living underground lifestyle. The construction makes no sense either. Moving that much rock with hand tools? The Romans built their roads above ground for good reason. Yet these ancient engineers somehow excavated millions of tons of stone, creating perfectly stable multi-level cities. Then there's the timing. Many were sealed from the inside, suggesting rapid abandonment. What were they hiding from? Surface temperatures? Hostile armies? Something worse? The strangest part? Most have connection tunnels stretching for miles, linking distant underground complexes, almost like they expected long-term isolation. Speaking of things that shouldn't be possible with ancient technology, let's examine something even more mind-bending. Ancient accounts of objects appearing and disappearing right before people's eyes sound like science fiction. But these stories pop up everywhere throughout history. The Philadelphia experiment from 1943 supposedly involved a Navy destroyer vanishing completely from radar. Well, turns out our ancestors were describing similar phenomena thousands of years ago. Greek historians wrote about priests who could make temple objects fade from view during sacred rituals. Celtic druids allegedly transported massive stones by making them temporarily weightless and invisible. Even more fascinating, these ancient texts provide technical details about the process. Sanskrit manuscripts describe something called Maya Yantra, machines that could bend light around objects. The texts explain how certain crystal arrangements, combined with specific sound frequencies, created what they called shadow shields. Basically, ancient cloaking devices. But here's where it gets really strange. Multiple cultures describe the same side effects. Witnesses reported hearing a low humming sound before objects vanished. They felt static electricity in the air. Some even mentioned seeing rainbow-colored distortions around the disappearing items. The Sumerian tablets go into incredible detail about mesh devices that could make entire buildings invisible to enemies. They describe operators who had to wear special protective clothing to avoid getting caught in the effect themselves. These aren't just random stories scattered across time. They're consistent, detailed accounts of technology that shouldn't have existed. What's even more puzzling is how these ancient descriptions match modern theoretical physics about light manipulation and electromagnetic fields. Speaking of impossible ancient knowledge, wait until you hear about mechanical devices that could calculate planetary positions with supernatural accuracy. When the ancient Greeks built the Antikythera mechanism, they weren't the only ones creating astronomical computers. Similar devices existed across the ancient world. But what's truly mind-boggling is how precise these machines really were. Take the Chinese south-pointing chariot from around 2,000 years ago. This wasn't just a compass. It was a mechanical computer that used differential gears to keep a figurine pointing south, no matter which direction the chariot turned. The gear ratios had to be calculated with mathematical precision that would make modern engineers nervous. The Mayans had their own version too. While not mechanical, their astronomical tables could predict Venus cycles accurate to within 2 hours over 500 years. That's better precision than some modern software. They tracked Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn with calculations that would take our computers serious number crunching. But here's what really keeps archaeologists up at night. These civilizations supposedly had no contact with each other, yet they all developed nearly identical mathematical concepts for tracking celestial bodies. The gear ratios in Mediterranean devices match computational methods found in Chinese texts. Coincidence? Highly unlikely. Even weirder, many of these devices show wear patterns suggesting they were used for decades. Someone was regularly updating astronomical data across multiple ancient civilizations. The question isn't just how they built these computers, but why they needed such precise astronomical tracking in the first place. Speaking of precision that defies explanation, certain ancient skulls display cranial modifications that seem impossible. Skulls that look like alien movie props keep turning up around the world. Not just one or two oddball specimens, but hundreds scattered across different continents and time periods. These aren't your typical human heads. We're talking craniums stretched to impossible proportions, some with volumes 25% larger than normal. The bone structure looks completely different too. Makes you wonder if someone forgot to tell anthropologists about a whole branch of the human family tree. Now, before you roll your eyes, let me address the obvious explanation. Yes, ancient cultures did practice head binding. They'd wrap babies' skulls to create elongated shapes for beauty or status. But here's where things get weird. Many of these specimens show no signs of artificial deformation. The bone growth patterns suggest they developed naturally this way. DNA analysis on Paracas skulls from Peru revealed something even stranger. Unknown genetic markers that don't match any known human populations. The mitochondrial DNA showed sequences that scientists couldn't classify. Either these people were incredibly isolated for thousands of years, or we're looking at evidence of something else entirely. The global distribution is what really gets researchers scratching their heads. Similar elongated skulls appear in Egypt, Bolivia, Russia, and Malta. Different cultures, different time periods, same bizarre cranial features. But even stranger than these mysterious skulls are the underground cities that seem to appear on every continent. Admiral Richard Byrd's 1947 Antarctic Expedition report reads like science fiction. He described flying over the North Pole and discovering a green, temperate land with mountains, lakes, and vegetation. Byrd claimed this area stretched for thousands of miles beyond what maps showed as solid ice. The official military dismissed his account. But here's what makes this intriguing. Ancient maps support parts of his story. The Peary Race map from 1513 shows Antarctica's coastline with remarkable accuracy. Problem? Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. Even stranger, the map depicts the continent without ice, showing rivers, mountains, and coastal details that modern science confirms exist beneath the ice sheet. How did a 16th century cartographer know what lay under miles of ice? The Orontius Phineas map from 1531 shows similar impossible knowledge. It accurately depicts Antarctica's shape, size, and interior features that weren't confirmed until the International Geophysical Year in 1957. Both maps claim to use ancient source materials that have since vanished. These source maps would need to be at least 6,000 years old, created when Antarctica was ice-free. Geological evidence suggests parts of Antarctica were indeed ice-free relatively recently in geological terms. Could an advanced civilization have thrived there before the Ice Age locked it away? The evidence for ancient acoustic weaponry might explain how such civilizations could have defended themselves. When Joshua's army marched around Jericho, something incredible happened. The walls didn't just crack or crumble slowly. They collapsed instantly. 7 priests blew ram's horns for 7 days, and on the final blast, massive stone fortifications simply fell down. Most people think it's just a Bible story. But what if there's actual science behind it? Sound can be a weapon. We know this now. Opera singers shatter wine glasses with high notes. Military researchers study sonic weapons that can disorient enemies or even stop their hearts. The frequency matters more than volume. Stone has a natural resonance frequency. Hit it just right, and even the strongest walls become vulnerable. Ancient engineers might have understood this better than we do today. Then there's the mystery of Tibetan monks, supposedly moving massive stones with chanting and drums. British explorer Henry Kelson claimed he witnessed this in 1939. Hundreds of monks arranged in a precise formation, using specific sound frequencies to levitate blocks weighing several tons. Crazy? Maybe. But acoustic levitation is real science. NASA uses it in laboratories. The ancient world was full of people who knew things we're still trying to figure out. Were our ancestors sitting on acoustic technologies we've completely forgotten? The evidence keeps pointing to one disturbing possibility. They knew secrets about manipulating matter itself. Ancient texts from cultures across the globe describe something that sounds absolutely bonkers. Underground realms filled with advanced civilizations living beneath our feet. The Tibetans called it Agartha. Hindu scriptures mentioned Patala. Even the Greeks wrote about subterranean kingdoms. But here's what gets really weird. In 1947, Admiral Richard Byrd supposedly flew over the North Pole and radioed back something impossible. He claimed to see green land, flowing rivers, and mammoth-like animals in a place that should have been solid ice. His flight logs describe entering a hollow region inside the Earth itself. The official story: navigation error, radio malfunction, case closed. Except Byrd's account matches ancient descriptions perfectly. The Inuit people have legends about warm lands beyond the ice where their ancestors originated. Buddhist texts describe vast caverns connecting to inner worlds where enlightened beings live for thousands of years. Then there's the science that doesn't add up. Our planet's core should be molten iron, yet seismic waves suggest massive hollow spaces. Aurora phenomena sometimes appears to originate from within the Earth rather than space. And why do compasses go haywire near the poles? Modern satellite imagery shows strange circular openings at both polar regions that governments quickly classify or explain away as photographic artifacts. Speaking of government secrets, there's another polar mystery involving ancient maps that show impossible geographical knowledge. Ancient stone circles aren't just pretty monuments scattered across the countryside. They're electromagnetic powerhouses that modern science is only beginning to understand. Stonehenge generates measurable magnetic fields that spike during certain astronomical events. The stones themselves contain high levels of quartz, creating piezoelectric effects when pressure is applied. Walk around the monument with a magnetometer, and you'll watch the readings dance like a broken compass. But here's where it gets really weird. These ancient builders didn't just stumble onto random rocks. They specifically chose stones with unique electrical properties, then arranged them in patterns that amplify natural earth energies. The rollright stones in England emit ultrasonic frequencies that change throughout the day. Local wildlife behaves strangely near the circle, with birds often avoiding the area entirely. Even electronic equipment malfunctions when brought too close. Similar phenomena occur at stone circles worldwide. Avebury's massive ring sits on an underground water system that creates natural electrical currents. The builders somehow knew that flowing water beneath certain rock formations would generate these energy fields. Dragon lines, or ley lines as they're commonly called, connect these ancient sites across vast distances. It's like our ancestors built a prehistoric power grid using principles we're just rediscovering. Speaking of rediscovering ancient knowledge, wait until you hear what prehistoric artists were painting on cave walls. Picture this: ancient cave painters supposedly banging rocks together to make crude drawings, yet somehow they're depicting figures wearing what looks suspiciously like space helmets. Weird, right? Take the Aboriginal rock art in Australia's Kimberley region. These paintings, some dating back 40,000 years, show humanoid figures with radiating halos around their heads. The Wangina beings, as locals call them, have large, round eyes and conspicuously missing mouths. The Aboriginal people themselves say these weren't humans at all, but sky beings who came from above. Then there's the cave paintings in Tassili N'Ajjer, Algeria. These 6,000-year-old masterpieces feature figures in what appear to be full-body suits with helmets. Some are floating or connected to disc-shaped objects overhead. One painting literally shows a figure emerging from what looks like a spacecraft door. But here's where it gets really interesting. Similar artwork appears across completely isolated cultures. The Nazca pottery depicts beings with oversized heads and goggle-like eyes. Medieval religious paintings consistently show disc-shaped objects in the sky with beams of light. Even ancient Sumerian cylinder seals feature winged beings descending from star-like symbols. The consistency is staggering. Either ancient humans had incredibly similar imaginations about fictional sky gods, or they were all documenting something they actually witnessed. Speaking of witnesses documenting the impossible, ancient engineers somehow moved stones that would challenge modern cranes. You know what's funny about ancient civilizations? They keep making us look bad at our own jobs. Take Damascus steel, for instance. This legendary metal could slice through European swords like butter and bend without breaking. Knights would literally sell their castles to get one Damascus blade. The weird part? We have absolutely no clue how they made it. For over 500 years, Syrian blacksmiths forged steel so superior that modern metallurgists are still scratching their heads. The metal had distinctive watered patterns, flowing across the surface like frozen waves. But here's where it gets really embarrassing for us 21st century folks. When the last Damascus steel master died around 1750, the secret died with him. Completely gone. We've got electron microscopes, computer modeling, and every fancy tool imaginable. Still can't crack it. Recent analysis shows the steel contained carbon nanotubes and carbide nanowires. Nanotechnology. These ancient smiths were accidentally creating structures we only learned about in the 1990s. The molecular composition suggests they understood heat treatment techniques we're still trying to reverse engineer. Then there's Roman concrete. Their harbor structures have been sitting underwater for 2,000 years, getting stronger with time. Our concrete starts cracking after 50 years if we're lucky. But perhaps the most mind-bending example comes from an even more mysterious source of ancient technological mastery. Back in 1945, a guy named Richard Shaver started telling people the wildest story you've ever heard. He claimed there were entire cities beneath our feet, built by an ancient race called the Darrow. Not just caves, mind you. Full-blown civilizations with technology that would make our smartphones look like stone tools. Shaver wasn't some random conspiracy theorist either. He published detailed accounts in Amazing Stories magazine, describing miles of underground tunnels connecting major cities worldwide. According to him, these subterranean dwellers had inherited machines from an even older civilization called the Abandoned Darrow. The weird part? Shaver provided incredibly specific technical details about these underground cities. He described transportation systems, energy sources, and manufacturing facilities that shouldn't have existed in his imagination. Some researchers actually started taking him seriously when they found unexplained tunnel systems in places he'd never visited. Then things got really strange. People started reporting encounters with these underground beings, kidnappings, strange lights, and technological phenomena that matched Shaver's descriptions perfectly. The military even investigated some of his claims during the Cold War. But here's what's truly unsettling about the Shaver mystery. Modern deep Earth scanning has revealed massive voids beneath major metropolitan areas, spaces too large and too organized to be natural formations. Speaking of impossible precision, ancient peoples somehow drilled perfectly round holes through the hardest stones on Earth. When archaeologists first examined ancient Egyptian temples, they expected primitive tool marks. What they found instead defied everything they knew about ancient technology. The granite boxes at the Serapeum of Saqqara showcase drilling precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate. These massive stone containers feature perfectly round holes drilled through the hardest granite. But here's what makes your brain hurt. The core removal patterns show spiral tool marks consistent with high-speed drilling equipment. We're talking about granite that registers 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. That's nearly as hard as diamond. Yet ancient craftsmen somehow drilled through it like butter, leaving behind cores with machine-perfect spiral grooves. Modern attempts to recreate these holes using copper tools and abrasives. They produce rough, irregular cavities that look like amateur hour compared to the ancient originals. The precision is so exact that engineers initially assumed the holes were made with diamond-tipped drill bits spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute. Then there's the feed rate problem. The spiral marks indicate these ancient drills cut through granite at speeds that would require enormous pressure. Pressure that should have shattered any primitive drilling apparatus. Christopher Dunn, a precision machinist, calculated the drilling rates and concluded the ancients were cutting 500 times faster than modern attempts using primitive tools. But perhaps the most puzzling discovery awaits us in Bolivia, where stone cutting reached impossible levels of perfection. The Maya didn't just create a calendar, they built a time machine made of mathematics. While Europeans were still arguing about whether the Earth was flat, Mayan astronomers were calculating the exact length of a year down to 4 decimal places. Their figure? 365.2420 days. Modern science gives us 365.24 or 22 days. That's a difference of about 17 seconds per year. Let me put this in perspective. If you started the Mayan calendar when Jesus was born and ran it until today, their primitive system would only be off by about 8 hours. Your smartphone's calendar app wishes it was that accurate. But wait, it gets weirder. The Maya tracked Venus with obsessive precision. They knew its cycle lasted exactly 584 days. NASA confirms it's 583.92 days. The Maya were tracking a planet's movement more accurately than we could manage until the space age. Their long count calendar spans over 5 million years into the future. Why would a civilization that supposedly lacked metal tools need to track time for millions of years? What were they planning for? The strangest part? They calculated all this without telescopes, computers, or even the wheel. Speaking of impossible achievements, let's explore how ancient peoples seem to manipulate the very forces of nature itself. Stone circles around the world mess with compass needles. Walk around Stonehenge with a compass and watch it spin like a confused tourist. The ancient builders somehow knew exactly where to place these massive rocks to create magnetic chaos. But here's what gets really weird. These aren't random magnetic hiccups. The patterns are deliberate, calculated, like someone understood Earth's magnetic field better than we do today. Take the rollright stones in England. Compasses go absolutely bonkers there. Scientists measured the magnetic field and found it pulses every few minutes. The stones seem to be breathing magnetism. Local legend says you can't count the stones twice and get the same number. Makes you wonder if the magnetic weirdness affects more than just metal needles. Ancient cultures built their most sacred sites on these magnetic hotspots. Coincidence? Not likely when it happens across every continent. Aboriginal Australians have song lines that follow magnetic anomalies. Chinese feng shui masters map dragon lines that match magnetic field variations perfectly. Here's the kicker. Our modern GPS satellites struggle with magnetic interference, but somehow ancient people thrived on it. They deliberately sought out these magnetic sweet spots. Were they using Earth's magnetic field as some kind of natural technology? Maybe powering devices we can't even imagine? The magnetic mysteries run deeper than anyone expected. But there's another ancient technology that makes magnetic manipulation look simple. Noah's Ark wasn't just some floating zoo. The biblical specifications describe a vessel so advanced that modern naval engineers scratch their heads in amazement. The dimensions given in Genesis create a ship with perfect stability ratios. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. That's roughly 450 feet by 75 feet. These aren't random numbers thrown together by ancient storytellers. Naval architects have run computer simulations. The Ark's proportions match almost exactly what modern science considers optimal for surviving massive waves. The length-to-width ratio of 6:1. That's the sweet spot for preventing capsizing in rough seas. But here's where things get really interesting. The Hebrew word for ark, teba, doesn't mean boat. It means box or chest. This thing wasn't designed to sail anywhere. It was built to survive, period. The 3-deck design with internal compartments creates a self-stabilizing system. As the vessel tilts, water and cargo shift to balance it out automatically. No steering required, no sails needed, just pure engineering brilliance that keeps the whole thing upright, no matter what nature throws at it. Then there's the window system, described in the text. Not just holes punched in the side, but a sophisticated ventilation network. Fresh air in, stale air out. The real mystery isn't whether Noah existed, but how anyone 4,500 years ago knew these advanced marine engineering principles. Speaking of advanced knowledge appearing impossibly early, ancient builders somehow created stone chambers that could actually levitate objects using nothing but sound. Deep in ancient stone chambers around the world, builders discovered something remarkable about sound. These aren't your typical echo chambers. We're talking about spaces engineered with acoustic precision that would make modern sound engineers jealous. Take the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. When researchers tested its resonance frequency, they found it vibrates at exactly 58 hertz. That's not random. That frequency creates standing waves that can literally lift small objects off surfaces. Ancient Tibetan monks reportedly used specific chants to move massive stones during temple construction. Coincidence? The acoustic properties get even stranger. At Newgrange in Ireland, the inner chamber amplifies whispers into booming voices while completely dampening outside noise. Builders 5,000 years ago somehow calculated the exact dimensions needed for this effect. Without computers. Without modern acoustic science. But here's what really gets researchers scratching their heads. Multiple chambers worldwide share identical resonance frequencies despite being built by completely different cultures thousands of years apart. The limestone chambers beneath Malta's Hypogeum Temple create the same 58 hertz vibration as Egypt's pyramids. Recent experiments using powerful speakers at these frequencies have successfully levitated lightweight objects. Ancient builders might have discovered that certain sound waves can counteract gravitational pull on stone blocks. Speaking of impossible ancient achievements, wait until you hear about the geometric precision of massive ground drawings created without any aerial perspective whatsoever. Deep in Peru's desert, something impossible covers the Nazca Plateau. We're talking about geometric shapes so massive and precise that they make modern surveyors scratch their heads in confusion. The trapezoids alone stretch for miles. Perfect rectangles that would make a geometry teacher weep with joy. But here's what'll blow your mind. These weren't drawn on paper with a ruler. They're carved into solid rock across hundreds of square miles. The precision is absolutely bonkers. We're talking about mathematical accuracy that requires aerial perspective to achieve. Yet these were created by people who supposedly never invented the wheel, let alone aircraft. Take the giant triangle near the famous spider geoglyph. It's oriented exactly 13 degrees northeast, with sides measuring precisely 2.8 miles. That's not a rough estimate. That's laser-level accuracy achieved 1,500 years ago. But the real head-scratcher? The lines maintain their width perfectly across changing terrain. They go up hills, down valleys, across ridges, yet never deviate even slightly from their intended path. Modern road builders struggle with this using GPS and satellite guidance. The ancient Nazca somehow calculated angles, distances, and orientations across terrain you can't see from ground level. They created a geometric masterpiece that demands flight to appreciate fully. Speaking of things that shouldn't exist according to conventional history, wait until you hear about the technological remnants scattered across ocean floors. Deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, researchers have discovered something that shouldn't exist. Metal alloys with compositions that don't match anything in our periodic table. Well, almost anything. These mysterious materials keep washing up along coastlines from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean. The weird part? They're exactly what Plato described when he wrote about Atlantis 2,400 years ago. He called it orichalcum, a metal more precious than gold, glowing with its own inner fire. Modern analysis reveals these ocean floor artifacts contain copper, zinc, and traces of elements that make metallurgists scratch their heads. The atomic structure suggests manufacturing techniques we're only just beginning to understand. Think about that for a second. We're supposedly the most advanced civilization ever, yet we can't recreate metal from a supposedly fictional ancient culture. But here's where things get really interesting. These aren't random chunks of corroded metal. They show clear signs of intentional engineering. Microscopic examination reveals layered compositions designed for specific purposes. Some appear to be electrical conductors. Others show properties useful for electromagnetic applications. The distribution pattern across ocean floors suggests a massive catastrophic event scattered these materials across thousands of miles, almost like an entire advanced civilization suddenly vanished beneath the waves. Speaking of vanishing civilizations, there are accounts throughout history of stones that refuse to obey gravity. When ancient Sanskrit texts describe flying machines called vimanas, most people think mythology. But these weren't vague stories about magical carpets. They included actual technical manuals with specifications that sound eerily familiar to modern aerospace engineers. The Samarangana Sutradhara, written over 1,000 years ago, describes aircraft made from lightweight metals with mercury-powered engines. Mercury? That's oddly specific for a fairy tale. The text explains how mercury, when heated and combined with certain metals, could create enough thrust to lift enormous weights. Here's where things get really weird. The descriptions match mercury vortex engines, a concept that wasn't theoretically possible until we understood fluid dynamics and thermodynamics. Yet ancient Indian texts describe exactly how to build them, down to the gear ratios and propulsion mechanics. But wait, there's more. These weren't just fantasy novels. The texts read like instruction manuals, complete with warnings about proper fuel mixtures and safety procedures. One passage warns pilots about the dangers of flying too close to mountains during certain atmospheric conditions. Why would mythological writers include such practical engineering advice? Some researchers have actually attempted to build working models based on these ancient blueprints. The results? Let's just say they're not sharing everything they discovered. Makes you wonder what other impossible technologies might be hiding in plain sight in our oldest libraries. Speaking of impossible ancient technologies, there's evidence that some civilizations might have understood something even more fundamental about manipulating the very forces that hold us to the ground. Back in 1922, archaeologist David Davenport made a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about ancient warfare. While digging through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, he found something that shouldn't exist. Buildings turned to glass, stone melted like butter, skeletons scattered in the streets, some still radioactive after 4,000 years. But here's what really gets your attention. These aren't isolated incidents. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe weapons called brahmastra that could turn entire armies to ash in seconds. The descriptions are eerily specific. Blinding flashes, mushroom clouds, hair and nails falling out. Sound familiar? The Mahabharata talks about iron thunderbolts that could reduce entire cities to powder. One passage describes how warriors had to wash their equipment in rivers after battles to remove deadly contamination. Makes you wonder what they were really washing off, right? Then there's Harappa, another ancient city with the same glassy ruins, same radioactive signatures, same evidence of temperatures hot enough to melt stone instantly. Modern nuclear engineers estimate these temperatures reached over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, either these ancient people had some serious industrial accidents, or somebody was playing with fire long before Einstein figured out E equals mc squared. Speaking of impossible engineering feats, let's examine how ancient builders achieved stone joints so precise that modern contractors still can't replicate them. Picture trying to build with Lego blocks the size of cars, except each piece weighs as much as a small airplane. That's essentially what ancient builders accomplished with megalithic construction, and honestly, it makes modern engineering look like amateur hour. Take Sacsayhuaman in Peru. These aren't your typical rectangular building blocks. We're talking about massive stones cut into impossible shapes that somehow fit together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle designed by someone with way too much time and apparently superhuman precision. The largest stones weigh over 300 tons. 300! That's heavier than a fully loaded jumbo jet. But here's where your brain starts to hurt. These irregular monsters fit together so perfectly that you can't slip a credit card between them. No mortar, no cement, nothing. Just stone touching stone with mathematical precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. Modern engineers scratch their heads because this type of joint actually makes the structures more earthquake resistant than anything we build today. The stones can shift and settle during tremors, then lock back into place like nothing happened. Meanwhile, our concrete buildings crack if someone sneezes too hard nearby. The tools supposedly available to these ancient builders? Copper chisels and stone hammers. Right. And next, we'll discover the pyramids were built with rubber mallets and good intentions alone. What if ancient civilizations didn't just carve images into crystals, but actually stored vast amounts of data inside them? Sounds like science fiction, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The infamous crystal skulls aren't just pretty artifacts. When examined under specific lighting conditions, they display internal fracture patterns that form geometric shapes. These aren't random cracks. They're organized, almost like a three-dimensional filing system. Modern holographic storage works by encoding information in crystal lattices using laser interference patterns. Well, guess what? Ancient quartz artifacts show similar internal structures. Some researchers believe these patterns could hold thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. Take the Mitchell Hedges skull, for instance. Its optical properties are impossible to achieve with hand tools. Light enters through the eye sockets and exits through specific points on the surface. That's not accident, that's engineering. Here's where it gets weird. Computer analysis of several crystal artifacts reveals recurring mathematical sequences embedded in their structure. The same sequences that govern holographic data compression today. Were ancient civilizations using crystals as hard drives? Maybe storing everything from astronomical calculations to historical records in virtually indestructible quartz matrices. The technology makes sense. Crystals are stable, nearly eternal, and can hold incredible amounts of information in their molecular structure. But how did they encode it without lasers and computers? That question leads us to something even more mind-bending: ancient artifacts that seem to mess with time itself. That's what we're dealing with here, and it's honestly pretty unsettling when you dig into the details. The most famous case? A pocket watch found in a sealed tomb in China, dating back over 2,000 years. The weird part is that this watch kept perfect time for 3 days after archaeologists opened the tomb. Then it just stopped. Forever. But here's where things get really strange. Workers at the excavation site reported that their own watches started running backwards whenever they got too close to certain artifacts. One guy's digital watch displayed dates from the year 2057. Another's stopped entirely, then jumped forward 6 hours when he stepped away. Similar stories pop up at dig sites worldwide. In Peru, researchers found crystal devices that seem to slow down nearby clocks. In Egypt, there's a room in an unexplored pyramid where radiocarbon dating equipment gives impossible readings, sometimes showing negative time. Ancient texts don't help much either. They're full of references to time benders and day stealers. The Mayans wrote about priests who could stretch the sun's path and make days longer during important ceremonies. Makes you wonder what they actually understood about time that we've forgotten. But even stranger than controlling time might be the possibility that some ancient peoples figured out how to connect distant places instantly. Picture ancient people with no satellites, no GPS, yet somehow building monuments that line up perfectly across thousands of miles. The megalithic sites scattered around our planet aren't just randomly placed rocks. They're positioned with mathematical precision that would make modern surveyors jealous. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza and Angkor Wat in Cambodia. They sit exactly 72 degrees apart on the globe. Not 71, not 73. Exactly 72. That's 1/5 of a circle, which happens to be a fundamental geometric relationship. Coincidence? Well, that's just the beginning. Stonehenge, the pyramids, Easter Island, and Nazca all fall along specific latitude lines that divide the Earth into perfect geometric segments. It's like someone drew a massive grid across the planet and said, build here, here, and here. The precision is mind-boggling when you consider these civilizations supposedly never contacted each other. Then there's the distance thing. Giza to Stonehenge measures exactly 1,440 miles. That's precisely 1/10 the distance from the equator to the North Pole. Again, perfect mathematical relationships appearing where they shouldn't exist. The megalithic yard, a measurement unit of exactly 2.72 feet, shows up at stone circles from Scotland to Brittany. Same length, used by cultures separated by hundreds of years and thousands of miles. But perhaps the most intriguing mystery involves ancient psychotronic technology. Deep in ancient temples and megalithic sites around the world, researchers have discovered something that makes your smartphone look primitive. Stone chambers that can literally mess with your mind. These aren't just pretty buildings. They're precision-engineered consciousness machines. Take the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. When you speak inside, the sound doesn't just echo. It resonates at exactly 8 hertz. That's the same frequency your brain produces during deep meditation. Coincidence? Not likely when you realize ancient builders somehow knew the exact dimensions needed to create this effect. But here's where things get really weird. The Oracle Chamber at Hypogum in Malta does something even stranger. Recordings show that male voices speaking at 110 hertz create a resonance that literally shuts down the prefrontal cortex. The part of your brain responsible for language and decision-making just stops working. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient priests apparently knew thousands of years ago. Specific sound frequencies can induce altered states of consciousness, trigger mystical experiences, and even cause hallucinations. These chambers were built with mathematical precision to hit those exact frequencies. Archaeological evidence suggests these sites weren't just temples. They were sophisticated laboratories for exploring human consciousness. But how did our ancestors discover these precise neurological frequencies? And what other mental technologies might they have developed? The genetic evidence from certain ancient bloodlines tells an even stranger story. Ancient texts from around the world tell some pretty wild stories about human modification. But here's the thing. They're way too specific to just dismiss as mythology. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki literally creating humans by mixing their genetic material with primitive beings. They even give step-by-step instructions. It's like reading a biology textbook, not a creation myth. The Hebrew Book of Enoch talks about the Watchers teaching humans forbidden knowledge and producing giant offspring. Sound familiar? Then there's the archaeological evidence that makes you scratch your head. The Paracas skulls in Peru aren't just elongated. They have 25% more brain volume than regular humans. DNA analysis shows genetic markers that don't match any known human population. Well, that's awkward. Ancient Egyptian art consistently shows rulers with elongated skulls and unusual physical features. The pharaohs claimed divine bloodlines, but what if that wasn't metaphorical? Akhenaten looks so weird that modern doctors think he had genetic disorders. Or maybe he just wasn't entirely human. The Aboriginal Australians have Dreamtime stories about sky beings mixing their essence with early humans. Native American tribes describe star people doing the same thing. It's the same story on every continent. Advanced beings tinkering with human genetics. But the real mystery isn't whether this happened. It's what technology they use to make it work. And that brings us to something even more mind-bending. Deep in ancient ruins around the world, archaeologists keep finding something that shouldn't exist. Devices that could generate power without burning fuel, without coal, without oil. The Baghdad battery was just the beginning. Take the Dendra complex in Egypt. Those weird bulb-like carvings everyone argues about? Well, electrical engineers have built working replicas based on those temple walls. And guess what? They actually produce light. Not much, but enough to make you wonder how the Egyptians lit those pitch-black tomb corridors. Then there's the crystal technology found across multiple continents. Quartz formations carved into precise geometric shapes, always near water sources. Modern tests show these crystals can generate piezoelectric current when pressure is applied. Coincidence? The ancient builders seem to understand something we're only rediscovering about crystal energy properties. But here's where it gets really strange. Several megalithic sites show evidence of electromagnetic fields strong enough to affect modern equipment. Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, the Great Pyramid, all built on locations with unusual geological properties that could theoretically be harnessed for power generation. The most puzzling part? Many of these sites were abandoned suddenly, as if someone just switched off a massive power grid. Why would advanced civilizations walk away from their energy sources? Speaking of mysterious technology, Some ancient devices might have done something even more impossible. Ancient sites around the world might not just be monuments or temples. They could be doorways to somewhere else entirely. Let's talk about interdimensional portals. Sounds crazy, right? Well, hold that thought. Throughout history, people have reported bizarre experiences at megalithic sites. Stonehenge visitors describe sudden temperature drops and time distortions. Some claim minutes feel like hours inside the circle. Others report seeing landscapes that don't match the surrounding countryside. The math gets interesting too. Many ancient structures align with specific electromagnetic frequencies. These frequencies match what physicists call dimensional resonance points, theoretical locations where our reality might connect to parallel dimensions. Celtic legends speak of thin places where otherworldly beings cross into our world. Norse mythology describes rainbow bridges connecting different realms. Hindu texts mention portals between cosmic planes. Every culture has these stories, using remarkably similar descriptions. Modern quantum physics suggests parallel dimensions could exist alongside ours. If ancient builders understood dimensional mechanics, they might have constructed portals disguised as religious sites. That would explain the massive effort required to build these monuments. Why move 1,000-ton stones unless the payoff was extraordinary? Some researchers believe certain stone circles create localized space-time distortions. The precisely calculated geometries and specific mineral compositions might generate dimensional frequencies. But here's where ancient technology gets even stranger. What if these civilizations develop something that makes portals look primitive? Picture ancient Greece, where philosophers debated whether machines could think. Well, turns out they might have been closer to building one than we imagined. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't just calculating planetary positions. Recent analysis suggests it made complex decisions based on multiple variables. The device could process conflicting astronomical data and choose the most accurate prediction. That's not just calculation, that's computational reasoning. But here's where things get weird. Ancient texts describe temple oracles using bronze devices that answered complex questions about politics, war, and personal matters. These weren't simple fortune-telling gimmicks. They provided detailed strategic advice that proved remarkably accurate. The Oracle of Delphi, for instance, supposedly used a mysterious bronze apparatus hidden beneath the temple. Visitors would pose intricate problems, and the device would generate solutions by processing multiple factors. Ancient writers describe mechanical sounds: clicking, whirring, calculating. Then there's the Library of Alexandria's legendary catalog system. Some scholars believe it used mechanical sorting devices that could cross-reference thousands of scrolls instantly. A kind of ancient search engine, if you will. The strangest part? These devices allegedly learned from their mistakes. Each consultation made them more accurate. Ancient artificial intelligence that adapted and improved over time. Makes you wonder what other thinking machines our ancestors built. Speaking of mysterious ancient technologies, there are accounts of something even more incredible. Devices that could move people instantly across vast distances. Ancient accounts of people vanishing and reappearing miles away sound like fantasy. But archaeological evidence suggests our ancestors might have understood something about matter transportation that we've completely lost. The Aboriginal Australians have song lines, invisible pathways across the land that their elders could somehow use to travel vast distances in impossibly short times. European explorers documented cases where Aboriginal guides would disappear at one location and emerge hours later at destinations that should have taken days to reach on foot. Then there's the curious case of the Nazca transport stones. These aren't the famous lines, but small obsidian discs found throughout the region with unusual crystalline structures. Local shamans claim these stones were used by their ancestors for instantaneous travel between sacred sites. When analyzed, the obsidian shows molecular arrangements that don't occur naturally. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe space-folding techniques that allowed adepts to step through dimensional doorways. The Ramayana mentions sages who could compress the earth beneath their feet, arriving at distant locations within moments. Modern quantum physics tells us teleportation is theoretically possible through quantum entanglement. Maybe our ancestors stumbled onto these principles through entirely different methods. The strangest part? Many megalithic sites worldwide share identical construction techniques despite being built by supposedly isolated cultures. Makes you wonder how they coordinated their efforts. Speaking of impossible coordination, wait until you hear about ancient weather control systems. Ever wonder if ancient civilizations could control the weather? Turns out, they might have been better at it than we are today. The ancient Chinese had something called rain-making ceremonies that actually worked, not just dancing around hoping for the best. These involved precise timing, specific locations, and what looked suspiciously like early atmospheric manipulation. Chinese records from 2,000 years ago describe officials who could summon rain during droughts with a success rate that would make modern meteorologists jealous. But here's where it gets weird. These weren't just rituals. Archaeological evidence shows massive bronze mirrors positioned on mountaintops, angled toward the sky in mathematical patterns. Sound familiar? That's basically how modern weather modification works, except we use silver iodide in aircraft. The Mayans took it further. They built entire cities with architecture designed to channel wind patterns. Their pyramids weren't just temples. They were massive atmospheric processors. The angles, the positioning, even the materials used seem calculated to affect local weather systems. Some researchers think they could trigger rainfall by creating specific pressure differentials. The really crazy part? Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe sky lords who could bring storms or clear skies on command. They mention devices that spoke to the clouds and commanded the winds. Makes you wonder what other environmental controls they mastered. Speaking of control, wait until you hear about their global communication network. Thousands of years before the internet connected our world, ancient civilizations somehow coordinated massive construction projects across continents. They shared identical building techniques, mathematical principles, and astronomical knowledge with impossible precision. The evidence is everywhere once you start looking. Megalithic sites from Peru to Turkey use the exact same 27-inch measurement unit. Called the megalithic yard by researchers, this standard appears in stone circles throughout Britain, temples in Malta, and pyramids in Egypt. The accuracy? Within 0.2% across thousands of miles. But here's what really bends your mind. These cultures had no known contact with each other. No ships crossing oceans. No trade routes spanning continents. Yet, somehow, they all decided to use identical construction methods and share the same advanced mathematical concepts. Take the Pythagorean theorem. We credit it to a Greek mathematician from 500 BC. Turns out, ancient Babylonians were using it 1,500 years earlier. Egyptian pyramid builders knew it. So did temple architects in India and stone circle designers in Scotland. Even weirder, the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge in multiple locations simultaneously. Agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy, and writing all emerged around the same time in completely separate civilizations. It's like someone flipped a switch and upgraded human civilization globally. But who had the technology to create such a network? The answer might lie in understanding how ancient minds could literally reshape reality itself. Ancient healing technology that makes our modern hospitals look like medieval torture chambers. That's what we're dealing with when we examine the lost medical devices scattered across archaeological sites worldwide. The Egyptians had surgical instruments so advanced that neurosurgeons today study their designs. We're talking about brain surgery performed 4,000 years ago with tools that rival modern equipment. But here's where it gets weird. Some of these devices don't match any known surgical procedure. Take the mysterious copper spirals found in Egyptian tombs. They generate measurable electromagnetic fields when exposed to certain frequencies. Modern researchers discovered these spirals can accelerate bone healing by 30%. How did ancient physicians know about electromagnetic therapy? Then there's the crystal resonators discovered in Mayan temples. These aren't decorative. They're precisely tuned to specific frequencies that affect human brain waves. When activated, they produce the same therapeutic frequencies used in modern sound therapy. The Mayans somehow understood that certain vibrations could heal damaged tissue and reduce pain. The really mind-bending part. Sanskrit texts describe healing boxes that could diagnose illness by analyzing a person's energy field. Recent experiments with Kirlian photography suggest this might not be mystical nonsense after all. But perhaps the most shocking discovery involves devices that could manipulate reality itself at the quantum level. Ancient texts speak of devices that could bend reality itself, not metaphorically, literally reshape the physical world around them. The Vedic scriptures describe something called Maya Shakti, technology capable of altering what we perceive as solid reality. Think Harry Potter meets quantum physics, except these weren't fantasy novels. They were instruction manuals. Egyptian priests allegedly possessed the Ben stone, which could transform matter at the molecular level. Lead into gold? Child's play. The real trick was reshaping space itself, creating rooms larger inside than outside. The pyramids might not just be tombs. They could be reality laboratories. Tibetan monasteries speak of the Chintamani stone, able to manifest physical objects from pure thought. Monks claimed it could create food during famines or generate tools from thin air. Modern physicists would call this impossible. Ancient texts call it Tuesday. The Aboriginal Dreamtime describes similar technology, song lines that could literally sing new landscapes into existence. Mountains moved, rivers redirected, entire ecosystems transformed through acoustic reality manipulation. But here's what keeps me awake at night. If these devices existed, what happened to the civilizations that used them? Did they accidentally erase themselves from existence? Were they so advanced they transcended physical reality entirely? Speaking of transcendence, some evidence suggests these same civilizations might have achieved the ultimate breakthrough, preserving human consciousness itself beyond death. Ancient texts from around the world describe something that sounds absolutely impossible. journeys to the stars, flights between worlds, detailed accounts of space travel written thousands of years before we even figured out how to make a decent telescope. The Sanskrit epics are packed with these stories. The Ramayana talks about spacecraft called Vimanas that could travel to other planets. Not just fly around Earth, mind you. We're talking interplanetary road trips. The descriptions include technical details about navigation between celestial bodies, fuel requirements for long-distance space travel, and even what sounds suspiciously like orbital mechanics. Ancient Sumerian texts mention the Anunnaki traveling between their homeworld and Earth. They describe regular commutes that would make modern astronauts jealous. The Epic of Etana tells of a shepherd who flies so high he can see Earth as a small disk below. That's a pretty accurate description of our planet from space, don't you think? Here's what gets really weird. These aren't vague poetic metaphors. They include practical details, landing procedures, navigation by stars, even what sounds like descriptions of weightlessness and the view of Earth from orbit. The Aboriginal Dreamtime stories talk about sky beings who traveled between stars in great ships. Native American legends describe star people who came from specific constellations and promised to return. But consciousness itself might hold an even stranger secret about ancient technology. Ancient civilizations might have mastered something we're only beginning to understand today. Consciousness transfer technology. The Egyptians didn't just mummify bodies for fun. Their elaborate preservation rituals suggest they believed consciousness could somehow be separated from physical form. But what if they actually knew how to do it? Sanskrit texts describe something called astral projection chambers, special rooms where consciousness could leave the body and travel elsewhere. Sounds like science fiction, right? Well, modern quantum physicists are starting to think consciousness might not be as tied to our brains as we assumed. Ancient Tibetan monks documented techniques for transferring awareness between bodies. They called it bardo navigation. The Dalai Lama's reincarnation process might be more technological than spiritual. Then there's those crystal skulls again. What if they weren't just pretty decorations? Some researchers believe quartz crystals could store consciousness patterns like a hard drive stores data. Ancient Mayans treated these skulls like living beings, talking to them and expecting answers. Greek mystery schools performed initiation rituals involving soul separation. Initiates reported experiencing consciousness outside their bodies, gaining knowledge impossible to obtain normally. Egyptian pharaohs might have achieved actual immortality through consciousness. Preservation technology we've completely forgotten how to use. But ancient consciousness transfer raises uncomfortable questions about what happens when reality itself becomes programmable. What if ancient humans didn't just build monuments, but actually reshaped entire continents? The evidence scattered across our planet suggests prehistoric civilizations undertook engineering projects so massive they're visible from orbit. Take the Sahara Eye, also known as the Rishat structure. This 40-kilometer-wide circular formation in Mauritania looks suspiciously artificial when viewed from space. Natural erosion supposedly created these perfect concentric circles, but geologists can't explain why the rock layers form such precise geometric patterns. The dimensions match Plato's description of Atlantis almost exactly. Coincidence? Maybe. Then there's the Amazon rainforest's dark earth patches. These incredibly fertile soil zones, called terra preta, cover areas larger than some countries. Indigenous people couldn't have created millions of acres of enhanced soil using basic tools. The carbon content suggests industrial-scale biochar production. Someone was terraforming the Amazon basin thousands of years before we supposedly understood soil chemistry. Australia's mysterious straight lines stretch for hundreds of kilometers across the outback. Aboriginal songlines follow these perfectly straight paths that cut through mountains and valleys without deviation. Modern satellite imagery reveals geometric patterns that look more like a massive grid system than natural walking paths. But the real mystery? Why would ancient people need to engineer entire continents? What were they preparing for that required reshaping the very landscape itself? Speaking of reshaping reality, our final mystery questions everything we think we know about who built these wonders. After 99 mysteries, we're left with the biggest question of all. Who built these impossible structures? Who possessed this lost technology? Who were they? The evidence is overwhelming. Someone was here before us, way before us. They moved 1,000-ton stones like we move furniture. They calculated celestial mechanics with computer-like precision. They understood physics we're only now rediscovering. But here's what really keeps me up at night. They didn't just disappear gradually. They vanished, completely, like someone hit delete on an entire civilization. Think about it. We find their impossible architecture everywhere. Easter Island, Peru, Egypt, Lebanon. Yet zero trace of who actually built these things. No bodies. No tools capable of the work. No instruction manuals. It's like finding a Ferrari in a cave with no explanation of how it got there. Were they human? Enhanced humans? Something else entirely? The elongated skulls suggest genetic differences. The Sanskrit texts describe beings from the sky. Indigenous legends worldwide speak of star people who taught then left. Maybe they're still here, hidden. Maybe they left for the stars. Maybe they moved to another dimension entirely. The greatest mystery isn't what they built. It's not even how they built it. It's why they let us forget they ever existed. Sweet dreams pondering that one.